Hey guys, how are you all? Welcome back to the channel. This is my new channel, so please support us. Now let's start today's story on What If Harry Potter Becca? Me, the youngest wizard king before Hogwarts. But before we begin, comment 2 blue hearts, be sure to subscribe to our channel, like this video, and share it with your friends. Also, watch till the end because this story is going to be amazing. And don't forget to check out our Patreon for exclusive Harry x Hermione uncensored spicy versions, link is in the description. Now, let's begin the story. This has been Harry's life for as long as he could remember because according to his aunt, his parents died in car crash when he was just 1 year old and he had been, according to her, saddled with them ever since because they were the only relatives he had left. At the age of 9, he had never known a mother or father's love as he had always been maltreated by the Dursleys. He barely got to eat 3 square meals a day and slept in the dark cupboard under the stairs. At school he had no friends because anyone that associated with him ended up being beaten by Dudley and his gang of followers, which by the way Harry was used to as he has always been his cousin's punching bag for as long as he could remember, and because he was so malnourished he was quite small and fast for his age, which made it a lot easier for him to escape Dudley's beatings these days. As he went to bed that night, he prayed as usual to himself that someone or something would come and rescue him from this suffering. And as usual as he slept, he dreamt of green flashing light and flying motorbikes. Little did Harry know that his prayers were about to be answered. 2 days later, Harry was feeling really happy for the first time in so long as his family had just left the house to go on a month-long vacation, and that meant he was going to be home alone for the duration of that time. He didn't let the fact that they left little food or money to dampen his already high spirits, or the fact that before the Dursleys left, his uncle had taken him aside and warned him not to do any funny business in the house. "I promise I'm not going to do anything," he had replied honestly, not that his uncle had believed him. The funny business his uncle had referred to was the strange things that happened to Harry, and as much as he kept telling anyone that cared to listen that he didn't know how any of these things came to happen, they didn't believe him. Like the time, Aunt Petunia had gotten fed up of Harry coming back from the barber's looking like he hadn't even been at all, had taken a pair of garden scissors and chopped off almost all of his hair to the point that he was almost bald, leaving on his bangs to conceal his lightning bolt-shaped scar on his forehead. Harry had gone to bed that night feeling sorry for himself and dreading going to school the next day, where he was already being made fun of because of his baggy Dudley's hand-me-down clothes and his taped-up glasses. The next morning he had woken up with a head full of hair looking exactly the way it had been before his aunt had chopped it off the day before. He had been sent off to his cupboard for a week, and as hard as he tried to explain that he didn't know how his hair had grown back, they hadn't listened to him. Also, like the time, he got into trouble for turning the teacher's wig blue. Or when the school had sent home an angry letter for climbing up the kitchen's roof, which even Harry couldn't understand how that had happened. One minute he had been trying to get away from Dudley and his gang by trying to jump onto the rather big trash cans in front of the school kitchen, and next thing, much to the surprise of Harry and his bullies, he had found himself sitting on the roof's chimney. Although he reckoned that the wind must have caught him mid-jump. He had been sentenced to his cupboard for a week with no food. With the Dursleys not home for a whole month, Harry could actually do things he loved to do for once, like going to play in the park, and he wouldn't have to sneak into the sitting room at night when everyone else is asleep to watch the television, or sneak into the kitchen to find scraps of food to eat, or sneak into Dudley's room when he's not around to play on his video games. It also meant he wouldn't have to sneak off to the library anymore, which he had been doing since he had learned to read at the age of 3. The truth is that Harry loved to read just about anything and is secretly a really smart, intelligent child, a fact that he had had to hide from his aunt and uncle by bringing home average result report card from school. Otherwise he would have been punished severely if he hadn't done, a lesson he had had to learn the hard way a few years back when he had started primary school and came home with an excellent and glowing report card compared to Dudley's abysmal and rather dreadful report card. Harry had been punished severely for trying to outshine and embarrass his cousin by not being given food for 3 days, a lesson he had never forgotten since that day. On his way back from the library, munching on the cookies the librarian Miss Emma had given him, which she usually did every time he visited the library as she thought he was too skinny, He heard Dudley's followers calling and running towards him, which they usually did every time they saw him, as it was a game Dudley had come up with to torment him further, and he knew that if they caught him, he was going to get beaten up again. As he took to his heels, trying to get away from the bullies, he thought to himself, "I sure wish I was in my cupboard right now, safe from these guys." Lo and behold, he found himself in his cupboard. He was so shocked that all he could do was stare numbly at his door. "How on earth did I get here?" he thought to himself. He looked around trying to make sure he wasn't just dreaming, even pinched himself, and from the pain, he was quite sure he wasn't. He thought back to what had happened and how he had ended up in his cupboard. He had wished he was in cupboard and he had gotten there. An idea began to take form in his mind. What if he could do it again? After all, he had done so before just by thinking about where he wanted to be and had ended up there. So he decided to start easy by thinking of himself in the kitchen. Amazingly, he found himself in the kitchen. Excitedly he began to try other places, like the top of the stairs, Dudley's bedroom, and even outside of the house. However, he stopped when he began to get hungry. As he went back into the house to get something to eat, he decided to fire up the computer and look up what he had just done. At least now he knew that what he had doing was teleporting. He would have continued to read on teleportation, except his stomach began to growl, so he decided to continue later after eating. Harry began to adjust to living alone in the house. He had been home alone for almost a week, and all he did was do his chores, eat, go to the library to study, which he is proud to acknowledge that he was now reading on university level, and when he got back home in the evening, he ate and then practiced his teleportation skills. He was now able to teleport to longer distances like the library and the park. Meanwhile, somewhere in another world yet unknown to Harry, the Department of Magical Law Enforcement situated in the Ministry of Magic, the use of underage magic indicator continually listed the Dursleys' address indicating use of underage magic. Madam Amelia Bones, the head of the department, had been notified, and according to the indicator, the use of magic was coming from a 9-year-old child, constantly not only breaking the rule of underage magic but also the one of unlicensed and underage apparition, which could be dangerous if not done properly. She was more concerned about the child apparating than the use of magic. After all, children at this young age are just starting to discover their magic abilities. She decided that she was going to have to send someone to the child's house the next day to warn his parents against what their child is doing, and after that she gave it no further thought after instructing a staff to do so the next day. However, she failed to notice or acknowledge that it should have been impossible for a child, let alone a 9-year-old one at that, to have the ability to apparate, as it is quite difficult and dangerous if not supervised to learn. Back at the Dursleys' house, Harry had just gone up to the attic to look for old pictures or letters of his Aunt Petunia that could give him an idea of how his mother had looked like while she had been alive, because after all, Aunt Petunia is his mum's sister. He figured that this might be the only chance he would get to do something like this, might as well take advantage of it. Just as he was rummaging through some of the boxes, he found a little abandoned, moldy box marked, "Don't open," which he would have just ignored, but being a child he was curious to know what was in it. So he carefully opened the box, and out spilled pictures of a little baby no more than a year old being carried by a man with black messy hair like his and glasses, and next to him was a woman with vivid red hair and green eyes just like his, and as Harry looked closer, he realized that those were his parents and the baby was him. There were lots of pictures in the box of his parents and him as a baby, looking happy. Sorrow and pain like no other gripped Harry, and he thought to himself that if his parents had still been alive, this was how his life could have continued to be. He sat there for a long time crying for what could have been, and as his tears subsided he spotted an envelope at the bottom of the box, which he decided to open. This was what it said. "Dear Petunia, I know it's been quite a while since we last spoke. I asked after you from Mum and Dad and they gave me your address, which is why I could send you this letter. So how have you and your husband been? I just heard from our parents that you had a baby boy recently. Congratulations. And hey, I just had baby boy too. He's about 3 months old now and his name is Harry. I've included a couple of his pictures with this letter. I'd love to see pictures of your child too. I know you don't want to talk to me, but I'm hoping that you could let go of the past. I mean, me being a witch doesn't stop us from being sisters, and I have never been anything but a good sister to you even after I got my letter to go Hogwarts, and I know you wanted to get one too, but unfortunately that didn't happen. Anyway, I hope you can let go of the past because I'd like us to get reacquainted and maybe one of these days my husband James and I could come visit you. I think you'd like James, he's really nice and he's a wizard too. It would mean a lot to me if you replied to this letter and maybe you could include pictures of your family too. I'd be waiting to hear from you. Lots of love, Lily Potter. Harry couldn't believe what he was reading. His mum was a witch and his dad was a wizard. Whoa, he definitely did not see that coming. That would probably explain why he could teleport and why all those strange things happened to him. But his aunt never told him about his parents' magical abilities, actually. She never told him anything about his parents, period. So his aunt had been jealous of his mother's abilities, which would explain why he always got severely punished whenever those strange phenomenon happened to him. Harry rummaged through the other boxes hoping to find more letters from his mother. Just as he was about to give up, he found another letter marked, "Don't open," so he opened it, hoping it was from his mum. Dear Petunia, I just wanted to tell you that I just got married, and although you didn't come to my wedding I know you were there with me in spirit. I miss you and I really don't know how else to get through to you, James. My husband says that when you are ready to accept my apologies that you will, but I just wanted to say that I keep apologizing although I'm not sure what I'm apologizing for. It is not my fault that I'm a witch and you are not, it is who I am, but that shouldn't stop us from being sisters. We are and we will always be. Anyway, I have left at the bottom of the page the address to my house. You are welcome to visit anytime and I would love to come visit you too if that's alright with you and your husband. Love, Lily Potter. Aunt Petunia sure knows how to hold a grudge, Harry thought to himself, and he quickly jotted down his parents' address, packed up the letters and pictures and took them all out of the attic for safekeeping. He was planning to pay his old house a visit the next day. Harry had woken up bright and early to start his mission in finding the house that his parents had lived in before their death. He quickly went around the house completing his chores, ate his breakfast before fishing out the letter his mum had written to Aunt Petunia, which had the address of his parents' home. He packed a little bag with snacks for lunch just in case he came back late, and as he had already decided that transporting to the house is the fastest way to get there, he closed his eyes and focused on the location, Godric Hollow, and with a soft pop he appeared at the doorstep of a cottage in the little village called Godric Hollow, which was lined with quaint little cottages, but his attention was focused on the cottage in front of him. Right in the front of the house was a sign that said, "Here stands the house of the Potters, in its ruined state as a monument to them and as a reminder of the violence that tore apart their family." Harry gasped. His parents had been murdered, the sign says it all. So why had his aunt told him they died in a car crash? Harry had so many questions, none of which he would be getting any answers to, until his aunt gets back from her vacation. He was about to enter the deserted house when he spotted a frail-looking elderly woman in a strange-looking robe in shocking bright pink, sitting in a rocking chair in front of a cottage across the street, feeding her cat. He walked up to her hoping she could tell him about what had happened to his family. "Hi," he greeted her. "Hello, my dear," she replied. "I was just in the neighborhood and I spotted that house, the one belonging to the Potters, and I was wondering if you could tell me about what had happened to them," he asked, nervous and hoping she would tell him. The woman peered at him with rather piercing brown eyes and said, "If you can see that house, then you must be a fellow wizard because only witches and wizards can see the house." "Why is that?" Harry asked, now growing even more curious and hoping she wouldn't get cross with him for asking too many questions. Because back in the Dursleys, he would have been clipped around his ear for even daring to speak, let alone ask a question. However, the kind old woman merely smiled and replied, "If you want to know more, you might want to come in because of the Muggles. We wouldn't want them overhearing our discussion now, would we?" With that she got up from her chair and walked into the house, with her cat at her heels. As Harry entered the house behind her, he still couldn't believe his luck in meeting a witch like his parents. He looked around the house. It looked quite normal until he spotted in the kitchen a wooden spoon stirring whatever was cooking on its own and a broom was sweeping the floor on its own. Harry would not have believed it if someone had told him what he was seeing, if he hadn't been looking at it himself. However, he kept himself in check so as not to give himself away about his inexperience with magic, because he figured if the woman found out he didn't know about magic, she might not tell him about his family. "Would you like some butterbeer, dear?" the woman asked. Sure," he replied, guessing it's some kind of drink in the wizarding world as he has never heard of such a drink until now. As the woman settled down on a sofa in front of him, she began talking. So I'm guessing you must be from another country outside Europe if you don't know about the Potters, am I right? Yes, I'm from America, he replied with an accent he hoped would pass for American, while wondering why everyone in Europe would to know about his family. Well, my dear, it's a rather tragic story really, she started frowning slightly. I guess you can say it started with a dark and powerful wizard, who I'm sure you must have heard his name. She paused, and when Harry shook his head in reply, she continued, well, we don't say his name if we can help it, but his name was Voldemort. Voldemort, Harry repeated in askance. Yes, he was a very bad wizard, as bad as a wizard could be. She paused to drink some of her butterbeer. Anyway, this wizard, about 20 years ago now, started looking for followers. He got them too. Some were afraid, some just wanted a bit of his power, because he was getting himself powerful. Dark days, my dear. No one could trust one another and didn't dare get friendly with strange wizards or witches. Terrible things happened. He was taking over. Of course, some stood up to him and he killed them. Horribly too. One of the only safe places left was Hogwarts. At this point, Harry had to ask, what's Hogwarts? This is the second time he's heard that name. First time was when he had read his mum's letter to his aunt. Oh sorry dear, I forgot you're not from Britain. It's a school for witches and wizards. I reckon you are too young to go now, but at 11 years old, children with magical abilities receive a letter from the school asking them to join. She smiled at him. Anyway, back to the story. I reckon Hogwarts was one of the safe places left because Dumbledore's, the headmaster, was the only one you know who was afraid of. He didn't dare try taking the school, not just then, anyway. Now, the Potters were as good a witch and wizard as I ever knew. Head boy and girl at Hogwarts in their day. I suppose the mystery is why you know who never tried to get them on his side before, probably knew they were too close to Dumbledore to want anything to do with the dark side. Maybe he thought he could persuade them, maybe he just wanted them out of the way. All anyone knows is he turned up in this village at their house, on Halloween 8 years ago. Their baby Harry was just a year old. He went to their house and, her voice shook and she took out a twig, waved it, and out of nowhere, a little handkerchief fell to her lap which she used to blow her nose. Sorry, my dear, it's just so sad. I knew the Potters, they were one of the nicest people you could ever meet, anyway. You know who killed them. But the real mystery is this, when he tried to kill their baby, Harry, he couldn't do it. Legend has it that after he tried to kill the baby and it didn't work, he left a mark on the baby's forehead shaped like a lightning bolt, I reckon to mark the child as a worthy opponent. Something very painful was going on in Harry's mind. As the woman's story came to a close, he saw again the blinding flash of green light, more clearly than he had ever remembered it before, and he remembered something else, for the first time in his life, a high, cold, cruel laugh. So what happened to Voldemort? He asked, as he made up his mind to call his parents' murderer by his name. Why should he be scared of a killer, especially one that tried killing him? That's a very good question. Same night he tried to kill Harry Potter was the same night he vanished. That's the biggest mystery, because he was getting more powerful. Why'd he go? Some say he died. Bollocks, in my opinion. I don't know if he had enough human left in him to die. Some say he's still out there, biding his time, but I don't believe it. People who were on his side came back to ours. Some of them came out of trances. Don't reckon they could have done if he was coming back. Most of us reckon he's still out there somewhere but lost his powers. Too weak to carry on, because something about Harry Potter finished him. There was something going on that night he hadn't counted on. I don't know what it was, no one does, but something about that child stumped him, all right. Makes the child even more famous. So where is he now? Harry Potter, I mean, asked Harry, curious to know if the wizarding world knew he was suffering where he was. People say he is now living with some Muggle relatives, to protect him until he's ready to come back to our world, which is complete bollocks, she said as she shook her head in disapproval. A lot of people would have gladly taken in him. After all, he saved our world, but Dumbledore said he knew what he was doing, that it was for the child's protection. This was a lot of information for a child of Harry's age to take in, but since he's not like most 9-year-olds, Harry got up, thanked the woman whom he later found out was called Madame Dinkles, and left. Thank goodness, he had a cap on, otherwise she would have spotted his scar right away. Now he knew a little bit more about his family. They had been brave and good people, and he is apparently a wizard. So there was a reason Harry had been suffering all these years, because a man took laws into his own hands and decided he would be safer at a place he would rather die than be. He hadn't even met the man yet and he already hated this so-called Dumbledore. Harry suddenly found himself heading toward his parents' house, and without hesitation opened the door and walked in. For a house that had been abandoned for 10 years, it looked quite normal, he thought, until he got upstairs, and that's when Harry saw the real damage. For in a room that looked like a child's nursery, the door was broken in half, clothes were flung all over the floor as if someone had been trying to pack in a hurry, and right in the middle of the room was a baby's crib with most of the parts broken all over the floor. This must have been my room and where Voldemort had tried to kill me, Harry thought to himself. He couldn't bear to be in the room any longer, so he left and went to the next room. In there was a big king-sized bed in the middle of the room, all made up with deep red duvet covers, and next to it was a bedside table with lots of framed pictures. As he peered at them, most of them seemed to be pictures of his mum and dad, while the others included pictures of a young James, a young Lily, pictures of James with 3 other men with the captions saying the Marauders, some pictures with James and one of the men from the Marauders with a caption underneath saying James Prongs and Sirius Padfoot. Much to his surprise, the pictures seemed to be moving, pictures of his mum and dad waving, pictures of his dad and his friends trying to give each other high fives, or in the case of the pictures with his dad and Sirius, playing pranks on each other. Harry felt like he could look at the pictures all day, but when his stomach began to growl for food, he decided to go downstairs to the kitchen to eat. Luckily he had brought along a bunch of snacks. As he wolfed down his snacks, he began to think to himself that hey, maybe he could come and live here and it is not like the Dursleys are going to miss him or stop him from leaving. As for school, he won't be missing anything, since he has already studied and passed primary school educational level. Right now, he is at a university level of study, and besides he wouldn't need to downplay his intelligence for anybody here, and he could also educate himself on magic as he had come across a huge library during his tour of the house earlier. With his mind made up, Harry finished up his meal and began making plans of moving. He will start living at Godric Hollow, although he's going to have to go back to Privet Drive to fetch his clothes, and when the Dursleys gets back from their vacation, he's going to inform them that he is moving out. It all works out, his life is starting to look up. Meanwhile, at the Ministry of Magic, Madame Bones had just been informed by the ministry officials sent to Privet Drive that there had been no one at the house when he had gotten there to inform them not to let their underage child apparate. The house had seemed deserted. They both came to the conclusion that the family was probably on vacation, which meant that they couldn't do their job until the family returned. Due to the inconsistency and incompetence of the ministry and its employees, they failed to notice the fact there had been a faint trace of magic around the house that morning, and so after this encounter they gave no thoughts about it and completely forgot about the whole incident. Harry was having the time of his life at Godric Hollow. He's been spending a lot of time in the library, learning how to use magic, although he didn't yet have a twig like Madame Dinkle's, which he finally learnt was called a wand. He, however, discovered that he didn't need a wand to do a lot of magical things he's been learning, like how to levitate things. He discovered that he just had to focus on what he wanted to do, and it happened. So far, he had learnt to levitate things. He had even learnt to control the objects to do whatever he wanted, like when he had wanted to clean up the house, he had simply sat down and got the house cleaning itself up. So far, he had also as a practice to develop his wandless skill, put up a lot of protective shields around the house, such as the anti-intruder jinx, the intruder charm, defensive charm, security spell, and also the shield charm, which was one of the easiest one he did, including the muffaliato charm and also the muggle repelling charm, which he figured would back up the disillusion charm already placed on the house to deceive muggles into thinking it was an abandoned and crumbling house. Although he was able to cast all those numerous spells, they had exhausted him physically and magically, and he had had to put off his magical studies practices for a few days so as to regain his strength and also strengthen his magical core. He figured he needed more practice so that he wouldn't be easily exhausted, since he had just started using his powers and him doing all those complicated spells doesn't help much. However, he still needed to get a wand, because due to the complexity of some magic spell he would require a wand to cast them, and from a book he had discovered in his mother's bedroom called Magical Places in Britain, he had learnt that there was a place called Diagon Alley, a famous magical shopping center, where he could literally buy anything magical. He planned to go there as soon as he could. He wasn't in a hurry to get a wand anyway, being wandless didn't hinder his use of magic. He had been at Godric Hollow for almost 3 weeks now, and the Dursleys were due back from their vacation today, and so he was going to Privet Drive to inform them that he had moved out. Harry had already made up his mind that whether or not they stopped him from living in Godric Hollow, he was still going to live there anyway. He decided to apparate to the house right where they could see him just for the fun of seeing the expression on their faces, and he wasn't disappointed. The Dursleys had just gotten back from their vacation and had found the house empty. They had searched everywhere for Harry to yell at him for leaving the house. After a few minutes of searching and discovering that nothing in the house had been stolen, they had resided to the sitting room to watch a movie, not in the least bothered that Harry was nowhere to be found. You could feel their shock when Harry appeared out of nowhere with a crack, and as for Harry, the expression on their faces was priceless. They all had their mouths hanging open, a stick of lollipop hanging from Dudley's. If it hadn't been for the fact that he wanted to be in their good grace so that they would willingly let him leave without arguments, Harry would have burst out laughing, because at this point he was really trying hard to stifle his laughter. "Boy, what sort of magic trick is that? Don't you ever do anything like that again?" his Uncle Vernon yelled, spit flying haphazardly from his mouth. "Yes, the neighbors could have seen you. It is bad enough I'm related to you." His aunt was now shouting too, "Don't ruin our reputation in this neighborhood with your freakishness." "I'm sorry," Harry said, trying to get them to calm down so that when he told them he was leaving they won't try to stop him. Getting them angry probably isn't the way to go about trying to convince them of that. "You freak. How did you do that anyway?" his aunt hissed angrily. Harry was starting to get really angry now. He had apologized, and although he had known they wouldn't just accept his apology and move on, he knew he didn't deserve the insults which are usually what came next after he had been yelled at for getting in trouble, and from now on he was done taking it lying low. "I'm not a freak, and don't you dare call me that, ever again." His eyes were blazing angrily, and even the Dursleys cowered, for he looked dangerous and not his 9-year-old self. "And as for how I appeared right in front of you guys, that was magic," he finished with a smirk, satisfied to see that his family looked scared, as the lights were flickering on and off on its own due to his anger. "There is no such thing as magic," his uncle said angrily, raising his left fist to hit Harry. Usually Harry would have cowered in fear. Wouldn't be the first time his uncle had raised his fist against him. He had lost count of how many times he had been hit as punishment after getting into trouble for one petty thing or the other, but not anymore. He straightened up, looked his uncle in the eye. "Don't you dare lay a finger on me, unless," he trailed off, still trying not to lose his temper. "Don't you dare talk to your uncle like that, you ungrateful child." His aunt regained her composure after Harry's outburst at being called a freak. "Enough of this talk about magic, there is no such thing," she finished, and to her surprise the young child burst out laughing. "Oh please, Aunt Petunia, you think you could keep me in the dark about my heritage forever?" The child said scornfully. "Well, before you go on spouting your lies, let me spare you wasting your breath now, because I know that my parents were a witch and wizard, so you can stop all that lying." He had to give it to his aunt. She didn't try to deny it, however she did look shocked. "How did you find out?" she hissed. The tension of boiling anger in the room was so intense between them that the 2 other occupants had been forgotten. "Did you really think labeling a box, 'Don't Open,' would stop anyone from wanting to open it? You went through my letters," his aunt yelled, interrupting him. He smirked. Boy, was he enjoying her reaction, and as he was way past caring if they tried to stop him from staying at Godric Hollow, not that they would have much success trying, he decided to goad her more. "Oh yes, I went through the letters my mum had written to you, even the one about you wanting to be a witch too. So badly did you want it that you wrote to the headmaster begging him to send you your own letter." "That is not true," she replied, with her cheeks flushed pink in embarrassment. "That's why after you got rejected by the headmaster," he went on, ignoring his aunt, "you started being mean and stopped talking to her because you were jealous." "I wasn't jealous, I was the only one who saw her for what she truly was, a freak," his aunt angrily replied. "Then she went and married that Potter boy, and if that wasn't bad enough, she got herself blown up and we got stuck with you and tried ridding you of being a freak." She stared at him disdainfully. "Obviously we hadn't succeeded. She died being brave. If you say one more nasty thing about my parents, Trust me, you are going to regret it, because here's a news flash for you. I am not only a wizard, yes, a wizard like my father, I have also learnt how to control my powers." He paused, really hoping she provoked him. "So go on, I dare you." The Dursleys were shocked, as they had never seen Harry like this before. He seemed more matured, grown up, and he had never talked back to them or let alone challenge them. Dudley, being stupid as usual, started laughing and said, "You can't do anything, you're just a loser like your parents, and a free." He hadn't finished his sentence before he found himself hanging upside down midair. "Let me down, you freak!" he shouted, now feeling rather scared, and at this point his mother was screaming and his father was threatening his cousin. Few seconds later, Harry had pointed his finger at his uncle and non-verbally cast a body-binding spell on him before turning back to his aunt, who was by now cowering in a corner of the sitting room screaming in fear and begging him not to harm her. He said coldly, "Unlike you, I don't pick on the helpless, and let this be a warning to you and your family. Next time you call me or my parents names, I wouldn't go so easy on you." He paused, taking a deep breath to calm down, as he was still really angry that they hadn't even shown any remorse. "And in case you haven't noticed, I am moving out and never coming back, so you can tell whatever you want to the school, because I wouldn't be going back there either," he finished, and with that he turned on his heels and disapparated. Meanwhile, in Hogwarts, the headmaster Dumbledore had just gotten back from a meeting with the school staff when his charm spell alarm that he had set up for the protection of the house where he had put Harry Potter to live with his aunt and family went off, and on checking it out, he found out that there had been a huge amount of magic being used there. He had known that they hadn't been the best muggles there was, according to stories he had from Lily Potter, but they had been the boy's only family, and for his plan to come to fruition he needed the boy safe and protected. He sent an owl to Kingsley Shacklebolt to meet him there, just in case Harry was in danger, and with that he disapparated to Privet Drive. However, what he saw there wasn't what he had been expecting to see, because there in the middle of the sitting room was a really fat pink-faced boy hanging upside down midair, and next to him was an equally fat man lying on the floor who appeared to have had a really powerful body-bind curse placed on him. He looked around searching for Harry, but all he saw was a skinny, trembling woman sitting at a corner of the room looking rather scared. Fearing the worst for Harry's safety, he approached her. "Hi, I'm Dumbledore," he said kindly to her. Hi," she stammered fearfully. "Would you mind telling me what had happened here?" he asked. As she narrated everything that had happened, it appeared that regretfully that he had misjudged this set of muggles, as it seemed that they had been mistreating Harry, and even to the extent of leaving him home alone for a month. Who does that to a 9-year-old child? Dumbledore thought angrily to himself, and although he wouldn't normally encourage what Harry had done to them, he thought they deserved it. What perplexed him was that although Harry was underage and would be able to perform underage magic, the spell he had casted on his family was rather a strong one for underage magic, and he seemed to have control over his magic, because if it had been weak, the spell should have worn off by now. Dumbledore was still deep in thought when Kingsley Shacklebolt apparated with a pop, and as he filled him in on what had transpired, Kingsley asked Harry's aunt the question that was on both their minds. "So where is Harry now?" he asked. "He moved out and said he was never coming back," she muttered. "Do you have any idea where he could have gone?" Dumbledore asked, and as she shook her head in denial, he began to worry and panic that not only had he lost the boy who lived, if the wizarding world got wind of how Harry had been treated at his aunt's place, not only would their hatred for muggles increase, but his reputation could also be ruined, as he had placed Harry with his aunt against a lot of people's wishes that he remained in the wizarding world with one of the well-known and connected wizard families. "Oh, this is bad, Dumbledore," said Shacklebolt. "He could be anywhere." 2 months later. Since the past 3 months Harry had been living in Godric Hollow, he had learned much more than he had at school, and his magical education has been going on quite well. He had found a potions lab behind the library through a secret doorway. He had been looking for a book on potion making, as he had decided to study up on it even if he didn't have the items to practice with, and had pulled out a rather peculiar looking book in the shade of deep red, and just as he was about to put the book back as it was blank, he found a lever in the empty book space and had been pulled it, only for the cupboard to move, revealing a room filled with all sorts of items for making potions. You could imagine his joy in finding the lab, like a child that found a secret stash of candy, and ever since his discovery, he had been spending all of his time in there, practicing and making potions. However, he started with easy ones such as Forgetfulness Potion, Cure for Boils, and after a while he had practiced every potion in the beginner's book for potion brewing before moving on to the more advanced one, and he had started learning to brew more advanced potions such as Draught of Peace, Confusing Concoction, and several others. As he learned to make these potions, he was however starting to realize that most of the time he didn't usually get the desired results even when he followed the instructions as written in the potion books, and that's when he began to make changes to a lot of them, which as he went along, he began to get the right results, such as when brewing Draught of the Living Dead, which after changing a few instructions in the book, resulted to being thicker as it should be. As he created these potions, he labeled them and kept them in storage just in case he needed them. While he was doing so well in his potions, runes, arithmancy, defense against the dark arts, which he thought was a weird name for a class, and charms, he wasn't having much success with transfiguration because of lack of wand. However, he did learn a few wandless spells such as the vanishing spell, which he had had to practice for quite a while because it required a wand, and without a wand, it took a lot of concentration and usually drained him magically. After a month and a half, he finally successfully vanished a spoon he had been practicing on. He had let out a really loud whoop after his first successful attempt. Luckily, he had placed a very powerful silencing charm on the house. After that, he learned to practice more on other larger items until he had perfected the skill. However, he had decided that although he needed to perfect his wandless magic skills, he would still need a wand. This was his life in Godric Hollow. He studied, he watched the television when he wanted to take time off studying, and a few days after he had started living there, he had run into a little safe built into the wall, hidden safely away behind his parents' bedside table, and when he had tried opening it, a little inscription in gold had appeared on it saying, "Only by the blood of a potter can this be opened," and a little figurepad hole appeared right in the middle of the safe door. With that, Harry placed his thumb on it and felt a little prick. He pulled back his thumb and a little blood seeped out from where his blood had been taken, but within a few seconds, the cut had disappeared, so had the inscription on the safe, which was now opened. Boy, does he love magic! He gasped when he looked into the safe. It was filled with both Muggle and wizarding money. He had learnt about the wizarding money from Madame Dinkles. He learnt that the currencies consists of 3 different coins, galleon, sickle and canute, gold, silver and bronze respectively. The safe was filled to the brim with mostly galleon and some sickle, and the highest denomination of pound currency filled up the Muggle side of it. Also in it was a will for the Potter Vault in Gringotts, which is a wizarding bank according to Madame Dinkles, stating that it should only be opened and read by a Gringotts goblin. He had already decided to go to Diagon Alley soon to find out about the will, but his studying had taken up most of his time. After his encounter with the Dursleys, he had taken some money out of the safe to buy some groceries for the house, as he was starting to run out of food, and because he didn't want to draw attention to himself at Godric Hollow, he had apparated to Privet Drive to buy the groceries, and as he was walking to the store, he thought he spotted through the Dursleys' kitchen's window an old thin tall man with long silver hair and beard, but he didn't care any more about them, and as he said he was done with them. He came to buy some groceries and that's all. He bought his groceries and apparated back home. Few days later, Harry decided to visit Diagon Alley, to get his wand and also to check out the Potter's Vault and will. Back at Hogwarts, Dumbledore was pacing around his office, trying to discern what had happened with Harry Potter and how he had gained control of his power at such a young age. From the position he had encountered the Dursleys, he had gathered that much about Harry's power control, and the spells used should be done with a wand. Where had he gotten a wand from? And who was teaching him to use magic, because those hadn't been accidental magic done on the Dursleys? He wondered, and although he had members of the Order of Phoenix looking out for Harry, he just hoped wherever he is, he was safe and hadn't gotten into the hands of a dark wizard that might raise him to be equally dark, because if that's the case, his plans won't work as he had hoped. I need to find that boy, and soon, he thought to himself. Harry apparated into Diagon Alley the next day, but had decided to visit Gringotts first because he figured it would take longer. He had on a cap to conceal his scar, as he didn't want people to know about him being back in the magical world yet, and he figured that if whoever this so-called Dumbledore was and is as powerful as people say he is, he would have known that Harry had left the Dursleys and would be looking for him to return him back to them, which Harry wouldn't be giving him the satisfaction of doing. He didn't need any help finding and getting to Gringotts, contrary to what he had thought, because straight ahead was a rather imposing tall snow-white marble building, and written in huge letters on the building were the words Gringotts Bank. As he walked up the white stairs, at the burnished bronzed door stood a goblin in a uniform of gold. Although Harry had read about the goblins being the guardians of Gringotts and had even studied gobbledygook, which is their language and culture, it was still quite fascinating to actually see one for real. They sure don't look like they do in fairytale storybooks that he read when he was younger, he thought to himself. As he went through the bronze doors, he found that it led to another entrance hall and another set of silver doors flanked also by goblins. As he went through these doors, he found himself in a vast marble long hall with long counters on both sides of the hall, and sitting behind these counters were goblins. As he nervously walked up to one of the goblins at the counters, who unsmilingly looked down at him, he spoke in gobbledygook. "Hi, Master Goblin, keepers of the wealth of the wizarding world. I am Harry Potter and I have come here to take out some money from the Potter vault." He finished with a bow, as is the custom of the goblins to communicate with each other in this manner, not that most wizards know about this or care. The goblin looked rather taken aback, as it was rare to see a wizard speaking their language or even polite to them, especially a wizard as young as the one standing in front of him, responsible for his shock. He quickly masked his surprise, as goblins hated showing any sort of weakness in front of wizards. "Ha, Harry Potter, the boy who lived, it is quite a surprise to see you here alone," he replied, also in gobbledygook. "Well, yes, also I would like the details of all the properties belonging to my family, and if you need any proof that I am in fact a Potter, go ahead and give me any test to prove it," Harry said, rather unfazed by the fact that the goblin seemed suspicious. In fact, he himself would have been quite suspicious if the goblin hadn't been, because the Potters, as Harry had read in a book in his parents' library about his family, were an old and powerful, ancient and noble wizarding family and are held in high esteem in the wizarding world, and the bank would do anything to provide their vault with maximum protection against frauds and intruders. There was a hint of respect in the goblin's voice when he spoke up. "Please follow me," and with that he came out from behind the tall counter and led Harry farther down the hall, and when they got to an abandoned and dark hallway, he stopped and stared at a wall, placed his palm on it, and hey presto! A door appeared in its place, and as they went into the room, the door disappeared and the wall had taken its place. In the middle of the room, there was a chair which the goblin led Harry to sit on, and he had then walked to the corner of the room, his back turned to Harry. After a minute or so, he turned around, and floating midair in front of him was a little glass bowl with gold and silver lined rim. He came to a stop in front of Harry and from nowhere produced a sharp-pointed needle with which, after asking Harry to pull out his right hand, he proceeded to prick his index finger, letting the blood drop into the bowl. As soon as the blood hit at the bowl, it disappeared, and so did the spot on his finger where he had been pricked with the needle. Harry looked up from the bowl to find the goblin smiling, well, at least what he hoped was a smile. "Well, according to the test, you are Harry Potter, the heir of the noble and most ancient house of Potter," the goblin said. "No offense, but how did putting a drop of my blood in the bowl prove that?" Harry asked, rather confused. "This is one of the most powerful and strongest blood tests used to prove someone's heritage and find out if someone is trying to impersonate. If you had been lying about you being Harry Potter or under the use of a polyjuice potion to impersonate someone, when your blood had gotten into the bowl, it would have overflowed with blood, which would have revealed your true identity if under the juice, and if you aren't lying, the bowl absorbs your blood as it is pure and true blood of the person taking the test, as you have seen from what happened with yours," the goblin replied. "Thank you for telling me about the process," Harry said with a bow, as it is with the goblin culture. The goblin had decided on meeting the child that although he hated wizards, this child sitting in front of him was polite and rather considerate, as he had not only learned to speak gobbledygook but also the goblin culture and had totally earned his respect. "You may call me Griphook, young Master Potter," he told the boy with a bow too. "If that's the case, you may call me Harry," the child replied with a smile. "Accompanied with the test as a result of all the vaults belonging to you as the heir to the House of Potter, and also properties owned by your family which is now legally yours. Also, as it was a blood test, it reveals all your magical abilities and gifts. Would you like to see that first or go to one of the vaults?" Griphook asked with a smile. Harry, more interested and curious as to what the result would say about his abilities than the money owned by his family, decided that he would like to see the results first, and this is the results as follows. Harry James Potter, son of Lily and James Potter. Heir apparent of the noble and most ancient house of Potter. Heir apparent of the noble and most ancient house of Black. Possessions. Properties. Potter Manor, Scotland. Number 12, Grimald Place, London, pending. Cottage, Godric Hollow. Black Manor, Wales, pending. Beach House, Barbados. Castle, Ireland. Castle, Bedfordshire. Beach House, Brazil. Black Castle, Ireland, pending. Possessions. Harry James Potter, Vault 687, worth up to 2 million galleons. Lily Potter née Evans, Vault 145, worth up to 6 million galleons. James Potter, Vault 638, worth up to 10 million galleons. Potter Family Vault, Vault 723, 150 million galleons, and jewelries and other items worth about a 50 million galleons, highly secured. Sirius Black, Vault 711, pending. Black Family Vault, Vault 720, pending. Abilities. Master Occlumency Natural. Master Legilimency. Potions Master. Wandless abilities, natural and advanced. Parseltongue. Parcel Magic. Natural Apparition and Disapparition talents. Metamorphmagy. Harry was speechless and stunned beyond words. If he really had all these abilities, then boy, does he have a lot of practicing and studying up on it to do. However, he was quite confused about something which he couldn't help but voice out to Griphook. Griphook, who is the House of Black and why am I heir apparent to it? He asked, confusing written all over his young face. That would be your godfather, Sirius Black's family, and as he is the Lord Black, he appointed you to be his heir so that when he dies you will inherit all of his possessions, the goblin kindly explained. Harry thought he remembered that name Sirius, but where? He carefully searched his mind, and as he had an eidetic memory, he was able to recall the photos he had found on the bedside table in his parents' room on his first day at Godric Hollow. He remembered a picture of his father with another young man, playing pranks on each other with a caption underneath saying, James Prongs and Sirius Padfoot. Wow, he had a godfather, an actual family. Still a bit confused, he asked, what does the pending next to the possessions from my godfather mean? It means that although you are to inherit all those items, however you can't do so yet as Lord Black is still alive, the pending sign will change when he dies, the goblin answered. Okay, thanks for the explanation. I would now like to see just my vault and the Potter family, and I would check the other two next time I come, Harry said, thinking that the sooner he could finish what he came to Diagon Alley for, the faster it would take him to get home and find out what had happened to Sirius Black, because as his godson, he should be living with him and not the Dursleys. He suspected that either there had been foul play involved or something else must have happened to have stopped him from living with his godfather. Very well, Harry, the goblin replied with a bow, before leading him out of the room. Harry came out of Gringotts, an hour later after checking out his vault and family vault. He had been taken to his own vault first, which Griphook opened using a small gold key, one he later handed to Harry. After the vault had been opened, Harry had let out a small surprised gasp as it was filled from top to bottom with galleons, tons of it. Getting over his shock, he produced a little drawstring pouch with a flick of his wrist and proceeded to fill it with some money. He took as much as he thought would be enough to last him for maybe 5 months, as he had no intention of coming to Diagon Alley anytime soon because he didn't want to give Dumbledore any opportunity to see him yet. Luckily, he had charmed the pouch to remain weightless and bottomless using the undetectable extension charm, because when they had gone to his family's vault, which was situated in the deeper underground part of Gringotts, protected apparently by a dragon because, as explained Griphook, it belongs to a very old, powerful and wealthy pure-blood family, he knew he had made a wise decision in doing so. As they got to the vault, Harry, expecting Griphook to open it with another key, was rather surprised when he merely placed his palm on the door and it opened. If Harry he had too much money in his own vault, boy, was he flabbergasted when they got into the Potter vault, as it was a lot bigger. One could fit a whole house in it and still have a lot of space left. The vault was not only big but was also filled from top to bottom with gold, treasures and galleons. There were golden coins, goblets, necklaces in diamonds, so many treasures. But the one thing that caught Harry's attention was the majestic bookshelf placed at the back of the vault, filled to the brim with books. I think I have died and gone to heaven, the boy thought to himself as he started selecting a couple of books on potions, occlumency and legilimency, blood magic, dark arts, defense against dark arts, charms and a couple of some on the history of magic. By time he was done selecting, he put them all into his pouch and he returned back to the top of the bank with Griphook. As they got there, Harry asked to talk to the goblin in private and he led the child back to the room in which Harry had taken the blood test. Griphook, you say I'm the heir to the house and family of Potter, right? Harry asked. Yes, that's true, the goblin replied. I don't have a guardian and I would like to be emancipated. Do you think I could get the right to be, since basically I'm the next Lord Potter? Actually Harry, forgive my mistake for not mentioning this earlier due to all the confusion of the blood test and all, but you are not the next Lord Potter. You are the Lord Potter. When your father was alive, you were the next in line, but since he isn't anymore, you have now taken over as Lord Potter, the goblin said with a smile. If I am Lord Potter now, how come the blood test doesn't acknowledge this? It still says that I am the heir on it. Doesn't that mean I have to do something else to be fully acknowledged as Lord Potter? The child asked, now very confused to say the least. The goblin, quite impressed that the child had figured all of these out, nodded, yes, although we don't get lords as young as your age, as there is always someone acting as head of the family until the heir comes of age. If the present lord of a house dies and the heir is still young, however, as your situation is rather different, we could allow you to perform the usual procedure needed to fully come into your rightful position, and as soon as you become Lord Potter, you are immediately emancipated, according to the laws of the ministry, and the blood test results would also acknowledge this automatically as well. How soon can I perform this procedure? Can it be done today? Harry asked, now getting excited. Of course, the goblin replied. All right, I would like it done today please. The procedure was quite simple. First he had to take a blood test to prove that he is a Potter and is truly the rightful heir, and as he had already done that before, they skipped that part and moved on to the next part, which is where a silver bowl was brought in, and again Harry had his finger pricked to supply blood into the bowl, which began to tremble, and as it did, Griphook told Harry to repeat whatever was written in the bowl. Rather confused by that, Harry looked into the trembling bowl and in red were the words. I, Harry James Potter, heir to the noble and most ancient house of Potter, solemnly swear with oath of the blood of the Potters running through my veins that I would uphold and honor the name of my family as my predecessors before me had done. As soon as Harry had finished repeating the oath, the bowl stopped trembling and the words vanished, and left in the bowl was a golden ring, and engraved on the center of the ring was the family crest, which consisted of a silver sword and a wand lying across each other on a golden shield, and flanking the shield on both sides were two fierce-looking lions who seemed to be in mid-roar, and inscribed around the crest are the words, "Bravery and honor shall we live by." Take it, Harry, and put it on the index finger of your right hand, the goblin instructed kindly, as he could tell that the young boy seemed a bit overwhelmed. As Harry did as instructed, he could feel the ring merging with him as one, and could feel power like no other rushing through his blood. He felt powerful. Grinning from ear to ear, he thanked the goblin and was just about to leave when he remembered that he still had the will he had found in his parents' safe at Godric Hollow, which was one of the reasons he had come to Gringotts, and silently chastising himself he retrieved it from his jeans pocket and proceeded to hand it to the goblin. This is a will written by my parents which recently came to be in my possession, and if it isn't too much trouble, I'd like to know what's in it, he said to the goblin. Very well, since you're emancipated you can read it, however if you hadn't been you would have had to wait until you came of age, the goblin said before proceeding to open the piece of parchment by tapping a finger on the seal thrice. There is nothing here that you don't already know, he said before handing the parchment to Harry. Harry took the parchment from the goblin and proceeded to read it, but instead of letter on the parchment like the goblin had seen, a holographic image of his parents appeared instead. Shocked, he glanced at the goblin, who merely smiled and said, "It was written to you so you will see them. I can only read it because I'm a goblin and have the power to unseal the parchment, and no one else would be able to read or see the letter unless of course you let them. Even I can't read it now because you have seen it and haven't given me permission to be able to read it." Nodding slightly, Harry turned his attention back to the parchment and listened to his parents. "Hi Harry, if you are reading this, it means that unfortunately we aren't with you anymore, but please know that we loved you very much, and even though we are gone we still do." At this point Harry couldn't stop the tears running down his cheeks in anguish, and as his parents went ahead to list all the possessions they had left to him, he felt that he would give up all of those possessions to have his parents back. "Harry, know that although we are gone, you still have people that love you as much as we do, and your godfather, Sirius, would take good care of you. Harry's father, James, was talking now. We trust him implicitly, and Lupin too. I'm sure they are going to tell you all about the Marauders. At this he chuckled before continuing, Merlin's beard. We were a troublesome lot at Hogwarts. He became serious. This will was written when we found out that Peter Pettigrew, one of the Marauders and our secret keeper, had leaked our whereabouts to Voldemort, and we know he's going to be coming for us soon. So son, please take care of yourself and be careful. Harry, don't cry over losing us, just remember that we are always with you in spirit. Always. Harry was so shocked that he didn't even notice when his parents concluded their speech. He was still fixated on the bit they said about being betrayed by one of their closest friends. Deciding that he would think over what he had just found out when he got back to Godric Hollow, he looked up at the goblin and said, Griphook, thanks for all you have done for me today. I really appreciate it. However, there is something else that I want you to do for me. What is it, Harry? The goblin replied, deciding that he would do anything for the boy. He had only spent a few hours with him and he was starting to really like him despite his hatred for wizards. It's not big really, just that I don't want people to know about me coming back to the wizarding world, because you see, as of now, I'm pretty sure that I'm being searched for, the child replied with a mischievous glint in his eyes. As you wish, Harry, client's indiscretion is our top priority, the goblin replied with a bow. Thanks Griphook, and as I bid you adieu until next time, may your pockets continue to overflow with abundant gold, Harry said with a bow before leaving. He headed straight for Ollivander's wand shop as soon as he left Gringotts, to buy his wand. However, before he entered the shop, he made sure his cap covered his scar securely, just in case Dumbledore came looking for him in Diagon Alley and asked the wandmaker about him. As he entered the dark shop, he felt some sort of magical energy attracting him to go to the back of the store, but he ignored the pull and focused his attention on the old man with white unruly hair that had just emerged from the back of the shop. Hi, I'm here to buy a wand, sir, Harry said. The old man looked at him with piercing blue eyes, and said, shouldn't you have someone accompanying you, or are you alone? I am alone, but I don't think that's a necessary requirement to buy a wand, is it? Especially I don't need a guardian to accompany me, Harry replied, flashing his ring to the wandmaker, who got the message clearly. The child is emancipated and a lord. Who is he? The wandmaker thought to himself as he instructed the boy to hold out his wand arm, and when the child did, he took his measurements from shoulder to finger, wrist to elbow, shoulder to floor, knee to armpit, and finally, much to Harry's relief, around his head. As the wandmaker was taking these measurements, he was saying, every Ollivander wand has a core of a powerful magical substance. We use unicorn hairs, phoenix tail feathers, and the heartstrings of dragons. No two Ollivander wands are the same, just as no two unicorns, dragons, or phoenixes are quite the same. And of course, you will never get such good results with another wizard's wand. Harry was quite fascinated by these little information, that it took him quite a while before he realized the tape measure was taking the measurements on its own. That will do, said Mr. Ollivander, who was flitting around his shop taking out various rectangular boxes, and the tape measure crumpled into a heap on the floor. The wandmaker then proceeded to place a couple of boxes on the counter in front of Harry, and as he opened the first box, he picked out a wand from it and gave it to Harry. Go on, give it a wave, the wandmaker instructed. As soon as Harry obliged, a couple of jars on a shelf behind the wandmaker exploded, which prompted the old man to quickly take the wand away from Harry. He gave Harry another wand, which Harry, knowing the procedure now, gave a wave, and this time all the boxes of wands on the counter fell to the ground, spilling out their contents. This went on for quite a while, until Harry, becoming exasperated, said to Ollivander, Sir, if you don't mind me asking, is there a wand in the back of the store, that you didn't bring out for me to try? Yes, why do you ask, and how did you know? The wandmaker asked, rather taken aback. Would you mind bringing it out for me to try? Harry asked, ignoring the questions the man had asked. Of course, replied the wandmaker, before going to retrieve the wand, all the while wondering about the boy. How did he know about the wand? I had it safely hidden away until Harry Potter is brought back to the wizarding world, he thought to himself as he brought the wand out front to where the child was patiently waiting. Holly and Phoenix feather, 11 inches, nice and supple, although I don't think this would work for you, but give a wave just to try to. The wandmaker gave the child to humor him but stopped mid-sentence as a gust of wind blew heavily into the room as the wand touched the child's hand. But what surprised him the most is the amount of magical aura surrounding the child. Before it disappeared, which signified the wand as the child's. Meanwhile, in Harry's case, when the wand touched his hand, he felt a warm feeling rush through his whole body, causing him to smile as he immediately knew that this was the wand for him, but he gave it a wave just the way the wandmaker asked him to, and as he did, a stream of red and gold sparks shot out of the tip like fireworks. "Curious, very curious," the old wandmaker said, still very gobsmacked as he put the wand back in its box and wrapped it in brown paper. "What's curious, sir?" the child said politely. "Well, the wand chooses its owner and it seems to have chosen you. I remember every wand that I ever made and sold, and it so happens that the phoenix that gave your wand its feather, gave another feather, just another one. It's curious indeed because the other feather was in the wand of Voldemort. I'm sure you know who that is." He paused, shaking his head in wonder or confusion. Harry wasn't sure. "I would have expected this wand to work for Harry Potter because of the connection, which was why I had kept it stored at the back of the shop, but it seemed I was wrong." He fixed Harry with his pale stare. "What did you say your name was?" he asked Harry. "I didn't, but my name's Dudley," Harry answered smoothly, wanting to process what he had just heard later. The wandmaker stared at him a little longer before giving a nod, maybe deciding to believe Harry. As Harry paid for the wand and wand holster he had been convinced to buy and was leaving, the wandmaker, who had been staring at Harry all the while, said, "Dudley, would you terribly mind taking your cap off for just a second?" Harry, knowing the game was up, suddenly turned around and non-verbally threw a stunning spell at the old man, knocking him out immediately, before the man could react, and with a flick of his finger he shut the shop and closed all the windows to prevent people from noticing anything. As soon as he was satisfied that no one could come in, he whipped out his new wand and took a deep breath. "Time to put what I've learned to practice," he thought aloud to himself. Pointing the tip of the wand to the wandmaker's head, he silently said, "Obliviate," and wiped the events of him buying a wand and left the man with a vague knowledge of at least selling the Holly and Phoenix wand. Satisfied with what he had done, because now the man can't go around telling everyone that he was back, especially to Dumbledore. Before he left, he restored everything he had done to prevent people from noticing him stunning Ollivander, back to its place, and as he left, nonverbally and wandlessly he countered the stunning spell with the Renervate spell, which should make the stunning spell wear off in a few minutes, as he had made sure the spell wasn't powerful enough to knock the man out for hours. So as not to be seen leaving the store, he also put a disillusionment charm on himself, and on reaching the front of the leaky cauldron, he disapparated on the spot. With a pop, Harry apparated to the door of the cottage, as he couldn't apparated into the house because of all the protection spells he had put up. As he let himself into the house, he went straight to the kitchen to get a drink and busied himself with tidying the already tidy house, just to divert his attention from thinking about what he had found out about his parents. However, he couldn't avoid thinking about it when there was nothing else in the house for him to clean. He just couldn't believe that someone could betray his parents like that, especially someone who was supposed to be their close friend. Why the bloody hell did they not leave where they were when they found out and go into hiding? Or maybe they did. The only person that could maybe tell him more would be his godfather, Harry thought to himself. But where the heck is his godfather anyway, and why wasn't he placed under his care after his parents' demise? After all, legally Sirius Black is his guardian. So many of these thoughts were going through his mind all at once, making him confused, and when he couldn't stand it anymore, he got up, deciding that to take his mind off of those dreary thoughts, he would go and visit Madame Dinkles, whom he hadn't seen since the first day he had met her. She was under the false impression that he occasionally came to visit a Muggle relative who lived nearby, and it has been about 6 months since he last visited her. Being almost Christmas time helps too, because in going to visit her, she would think he was back in England to spend the Christmas holiday with his relatives, since she still thought he was American and so lived in America. Harry smiled as he knocked on her door, because as soon as the kind old woman opened the door, she wrapped him in a hug, which made him a bit wistful, as he wasn't used to this kind of display of affection or any kind of affection at all, and being hugged by the woman felt so warm and grandmotherly. When she finally let go him, she smiled and invited him. "So how have you been, my dear boy? It's been a while," she asked warmly, as she handed him a cup of butterbeer, which he gratefully took as he had discovered his love for the drink, but hadn't gotten around to buying some since he had had his first butterbeer. "Yes, it has been a while, just been studying a lot, that's all," replied Harry, and as they talked, he began to realize how much he had missed talking with someone. Since he had been living alone, he hasn't had any contact with other people, let alone talk to them and have a normal conversation, and his visit to Diagon Alley doesn't count, that had been strictly business. They talked until around 6 in the evening, until Madame Dinkles asked if his parents wouldn't get worried if he came home late, and so as not to blow up his story about being in Godric Hollow with his parents, he got up and thanked her for spending time with him, and just as he was about to leave, an idea popped into his head, and before he could stop himself, he turned around and asked, "Can you tell me about Sirius Black?" "How did you know about Sirius Black?" the elderly woman asked, surprised. "I didn't think you Americans knew about him." "Oh, I read about how he was friends with the Potters somewhere," Harry replied, hoping desperately that she knew something about his godfather that would give him a clue about where he was. "Oh, okay, well, you might want to sit down for this story," the woman kindly said, before taking a seat herself. "Now about Sirius Black," she continued, "he was a close childhood friend of Harry Potter's father, James. However, when the Potters knew that Voldemort was coming after them, they made Sirius their secret keeper, but he betrayed them to the Dark Lord by willingly informing him of their hiding place. After the death of their friend, Peter Pettigrew, one of the Potters' friends, bravely went to confront Sirius, screamed at him for betraying his friends, and before he could defend himself," she paused, shaking her head sadly, "Sirius killed him and 12 other Muggles by blowing up the street, and all that was left of poor Peter was a finger." During the woman's explanation, Harry had been glued to his seat, too numb with shock and surprise to even ask any questions. All that was going on through his mind at that point was that his parents' supposedly best friend and his godfather had betrayed his family and basically ruined his chance at having a family. However, before he could go further with those dark thoughts, it suddenly hit him. His parents. They had said Peter Pettigrew had betrayed them, not Sirius, which means that Peter must have found a way of framing Sirius for his crimes. This was a lot to process in a day, and he planned on thinking more about it later. However, there was just one thing he needed to know before he left. Madame Dinkles," he said, barely a whisper. "Yes, my dear," the old woman replied kindly to the boy, who looked a bit pale, which she construed to be as a result of the tale she had just told him. Most people had similar reaction of shock and surprise when they heard about Sirius Black, so she was at all surprised by the child's expression. She just hoped that she hadn't scared him too much, after all he was only a child. "Where is Sirius Black now? Was he caught?" the child asked. "Oh yes, he was, and right now, he is in Azkaban, and has been since he had been caught," Madame Dinkles replied with a smile, hoping this might assuage the child's shock and what she ignorantly thought was fear in the child's eyes. Meanwhile, Harry was not thrilled by what he had just heard. He had to find a way to get his godfather out of Azkaban. Even if he succeeded in doing so, he hoped to God that Sirius would still be sane, because from what he had read about Azkaban, he wouldn't even wish his enemies, or even the Dursleys, to be thrown in there. "Well, Voldemort could be an exception to that rule. He did kill my parents," the child thought darkly. That night, as Harry laid wide awake on his bed, too restless to sleep, all he could think about was his innocent godfather trapped and suffering in that god-awful prison for a crime he did not commit. Poor Sirius, the child thought. He thought about how this Peter Pettigrew had caused so many lives to be lost and in some cases ruined. Not only did he lost his parents because of this same guy, but also his godfather. As he thought about this, he started to become really angry, so angry he became that he didn't notice the house had began to shake and everything in it. It was when he heard the dresser across fall with a heavy thud, did he then notice the effects of his emotions on the house and had to take a few breaths to calm himself down and gain control of his emotions. Truth be told, he felt really helpless and at loss on what to do about the matter of his godfather, because inasmuch as he knew Sirius was innocent, how could he prove this to the rest of the wizarding world so that he could be released back into the society, because right now Sirius was seen as a very dangerous man. It is basically his word against the world. For the first time since he moved to Godric Hollow, Harry felt like he was back at the Dursleys, helpless and alone. When he started to feel objects in the swirling haphazardly midair, he knew he was losing control of the tight leash he had on his emotion again. not knowing what to do and knowing that if he kept on thinking about his godfather and the inhumane place he is being kept in, he would lose control again, and with that he closed his eyes and fell into an uneasy sleep where he kept dreaming of soul-beeping demons, a faceless man screaming for help. He woke the next morning with a start, and when he touched his face he was surprised to feel tears streaming down his face. His dream had been too vivid and had felt so real. He dreamt that he was standing outside the gate of a prison cell, and inside the cell, on the floor, sat a gaunt-looking faceless man, his clothes ragged and dirty. The man looked up, and just as Harry was about to say something to him, a black shapeless with vivid red eyes appeared out of nowhere and grabbed hold the man around the neck, choking him until his eyes bulged. Harry tried to scream but found that no sound came out of his mouth. He tried to look away but his body wouldn't move, it was like he was paralyzed. The demon then plunges his claw-like hand into the man's chest and pulls out his heart. At this point the man was screaming and crying out for help, his hands reaching and grasping the thin air. Harry tried again to scream but nothing came out of his mouth. He could feel the man's pain and agony, which was such that he too started crying. It was this he was dreaming of when he woke up. The dream had been all too vivid. As he dragged himself up to a sitting position, he sighed deeply, for he knew that the man in the dream had been serious and he just knew that had to try to find a way to get his godfather out of prison, no matter what the consequences were. At this point, he didn't care if Dumbledore found him out, all he knew that he would find all means to get his godfather out of prison and reunited with him again. With this resolve, he got up to go take a bath. 2 days have gone by and Harry still hadn't come up with a way of freeing Sirius. He had taken to reading every book on the Ministry of Magic and their laws he could lay his hands on, but he couldn't find any loopholes that helped Sirius. On the 3rd day, he was becoming really frustrated with his lack of fruitful result and was starting to lose control on his emotion, which always affected his control on his powers, the result being this time that he unwittingly set fire on the book that he had just finished reading. As he dashed to get some water to put on the book to extinguish the fire, he began to think about how he was beginning to lose control on his powers, which wouldn't be of any help to Sirius should he try to take his case up with the Ministry. A child with unstable powers trying to defend and help free a convicted murderer would not win any favors for Sirius. With that thought at the back of his mind, he decided that while still trying to find a way of freeing his godfather, he would also continue his studies, especially now that he had discovered his magical abilities through the blood test. He ran to fetch the books that he had retrieved from his family vault and proceeded to start reading and practicing them. Within a month, he had discovered that he was rather good at advanced transfiguration, and having his wand helps too, and had improved drastically on wandless magic. He has also been trying Parseltongue and Parcel magic, which wasn't difficult surprisingly. He hadn't even known that he was speaking Parseltongue the first time he tried. He still worked on making potion and even dabbled in creating one himself, which he called Spell Shield Potion. The purpose of the spell is that if the drinker is ever attacked, the spell would bounce off the drinker and reverse back to the spellcaster. He had tried out the potion on himself after finally succeeding in making it, which took about 3 disastrous attempts, and had also used a dummy to attack him to able to deduce the effects of the potion, which he could now proudly say was perfect and successful. He had also been practicing a lot on metamorphmagy, which he could proudly say he was rather good at. He knew this because he had practiced morphing his scar into nothing on his forehead, which had worked perfectly because after checking a mirror, there had been just skin where his scar used to be. Then to try more complex ones, he had morphed into a muggle one time and went about the streets of Godric Hollow. He even went into the park to play and successfully came back home, compromising his true identity. However, the most important study he had been taking so far though, would be defense against dark arts, which hasn't been easy since there isn't enough room in the cottage to move around, and he was thinking that as soon as he gets Sirius out of Azkaban, they would be moving to one of his castles, which he figured would have more room for his Dada practices. He had even been learning a few dark spells, which he figured could be useful in a fight, as it would be unexpected of him to use them. But, hey, whatever would be useful in defeating enemies should always remain top priority, be it dark or light spells and magic, Harry had thought to himself when studying the spells. Most importantly, he had learnt to gain control of his powers and even learnt to rein it in so that a really powerful wizard wouldn't be able to deduce how much power he got by looking at his aura, because he had read from a book that it was possible to do so in a fight or duel that gives the person a bit more leverage. as he needed to be able to have control on his powers to be able to practice occlumency and leglimency, which he could now proudly say he was getting rather good at. He had tried leglimency on a few unsuspecting muggles whenever he went for a walk in his metamorphmedy disguise as a regular muggle, and boy was it rather gratifying to find out that all he had practiced actually worked. He had even learnt to defend his mind and turn it on or off if he felt like doing so, which helped a lot when he starts to overthink things. However, no matter how he tried to distract himself from his worries, bringing his godfather out of Azkaban was always at the forefront of his mind. Until he did so, he wouldn't stop trying. A day before Christmas, Harry was reading a book on ancient runes and was jotting down the ones that he could practice, when he heard people outside of the house on the streets singing Christmas carols, which he thought was odd. So he ran to his room to check for the date on the calendar that he had bought recently after he had realized that he had missed his own birthday without even knowing. After checking the calendar, he realized that it was in fact Christmas Eve, and having never celebrated a normal one before, boy was he excited, because at the Dursleys, they always locked him up in his cupboard when they had a Christmas party and never gave him food to eat, and so he had to find scraps at the bottom of the pot later in the middle of the night when they finally went off to bed. Well, not this time, he thought defiantly to himself. He was going to have a traditional Christmas dinner all by himself. He had hoped Sirius would be here by now, but he still hadn't been able to find a loophole in the bloody Ministry of Magic law. But right now he wasn't going to think about that because this is his first proper Christmas and he was going to do it right. So that night, using his metamorphmedy abilities, he disguised himself as a muggle and went shopping for items he would require to make his dinner. He even went a little overboard by buying a few Christmas decorations even though he would be eating alone. However, on his way back home, he spotted an old man with rather white long beard tucked into the belt of his robes, and with a jolt, Harry recognized him as the same old man he had had a glimpse of from the Dursleys' kitchen window the day he had left them for good. Without a doubt, this man is from the magical world, he thought to himself. So he hid behind a small bush not far away from the house and watched as the old man circulated the house, as if trying to decipher if someone is in there or not. After a few more minutes of doing this, the man turned on the spot and discreetly disapparated with a soft pop. Just when Harry was going to come out of the bush and make his way into the house, the old man apparated back, but this time, with another man. Harry could just make out what they were saying, barely. "Dumbledore, I don't think this house has been inhabited. I mean, look at it, it is in ruins," the man that had come along with Dumbledore said. "I know, Kingsley, however, there are spells that could make it look uninhabited," Dumbledore replied, still staring at the house, trying to decide if Harry could be in there, but like before he wasn't having any luck. "I know that, but a child can't perform that level of magic without a lot of practice, especially Harry that hasn't even been exposed to the magical world," the man named Kingsley said. "Well, I'm going to check inside, just in case, which is why I brought you with me, as an or you might find anything suspicious that I might miss," Dumbledore replied, now moving towards the door. However, just as he touched the door, he was thrown back with such mighty force that he hit the ground hard, knocking the wind out of him. The man called Kingsley ran over to him and helped him up. "Are you all right?" he asked the old man as he helped him get up. Yes, I'm fine," the old man replied. "What happened? It seems that I might have misjudged the Ministry of Magic. They put in a lot of protection spells on this house, enough that it would take days, maybe weeks to bring down. There are some really powerful spells placed on this house, which I didn't know they had even placed on, and I was there when they did the spells," the old man replied, sounding rather surprised. "Maybe they came back and put some more on, since it holds historical importance to our world," Kingsley said, sounding quite impressed with the Ministry of Magic. "At least, we now know that Harry is definitely not here, but where could he be?" Dumbledore thought aloud. Thinking the question was directed at him, Kingsley said, "Don't worry, Dumbledore, we would find him. I checked with every shop owner in Diagon Alley, but no one had seen Harry Potter since the day he had gone missing. But I have to ask, when you do find Harry, what are you going to do with him?" "I am going to send back to his aunt and her family. Of course, I can't have him knowing about our world until his letter from Hogwarts gets him, otherwise, my plan is ruined." "But Dumbledore, those people are the worst kind of muggles, and after I used occlumency on them, I saw how they had mistreated Harry since the day he had been placed under their care. Why would you want to put him back there?" Kingsley asked, really confused, because he just couldn't understand why Dumbledore would want the child to return to those kinds of people. It explains why the child had run away in the first place. Those muggles were just simply dreadful. It is all part of my plan and all for the greater good, Dumbledore replied simply and calmly, but in a voice that hinted that he shouldn't ask any more questions on the topic. Harry, still hidden behind the bush, watched as the men disapparated before coming out from the bushes and running quickly into the house, and effectively bolting on every lock on the door. His excitement for Christmas briefly forgotten, he thought back to what he had just heard. So, that's the famous Dumbledore, he thought as he made his way into the kitchen to put away the groceries. His calculations had been right in guessing that Dumbledore would be searching for him. He had if always known that they found him, they would forcefully return him to the Dursleys, but hearing the man that had put him there in the first place say it aloud despite knowing how Harry had been mistreated in the hands of his aunt and her family, just made Harry see red. Boy, did he hate that man's gut more than ever now, but there is no way in hell he would let them return him to the Dursleys or in any case be found. However, there was one good thing that Harry got from the whole thing, and that is watching Dumbledore get thrown on his behind when he tried to come into the house. At least my spells worked, the boy thought smugly to himself, cheering up at the memory of watching Dumbledore get thrown out, before proceeding to decorate the house. A month had gone by since Dumbledore had tried to pry his way into the house, and Harry had long forgotten about the incident. He was more engrossed with his studies and finding a way to get his godfather out of Azkaban. In fact, he was getting obsessed with finding a way to get Sirius out. That it was becoming unhealthy, but he had made a personal promise to free his godfather. He just didn't like the idea that the innocent man was rotting away in prison. During his study time, Harry was just practicing a few complex transfiguration spells when an idea suddenly popped into his head. He dropped everything he was doing and ran upstairs to his room, almost falling down at some point in his haste to reach his bedroom. As soon as he got there, he opened his family's safe and retrieved his parents' will and listened to them talking through a projection until he got to the part he wanted to hear. As soon as he heard it, he rolled up the parchment and returned it back into the safe before going back downstairs to fetch his wand and a little vial. Placing the wand at his temple, he drew out the memory of him listening to his parents' will and placed the memory in the vial before corking it up. He fetched a piece of parchment and quickly wrote a letter before sealing it up with his family seal to show the importance of the letter. As soon as he was done, he disapparated on the spot. As soon as he apparated into Diagon Alley, he ran to a dark corner and disguised himself, using his metamorphagus powers, as a middle-aged man with dark brown hair and brown eyes, and headed straight for the owl post office. Paying for the services of a small tawny owl, he attached his letter and vial to its leg and sent it off, and with that done, he headed to Elop's Owl Emporium to buy his own owl, because he figured with the letter he had just sent away, he is bound to get a reply and might need to send another letter. However, he couldn't keep wasting his time by coming to the owl post office every time he needed to send one. Inside was relatively small and dark, but filled with owls of different colors and size in cages, watching all of the passerby outside the shop. Harry was just looking around trying to decide on an owl of his choice when he saw it at the corner of the shop, a snowy white owl, and he just knew he had to have him. He had felt some sort of connection to it, like it was meant to belong to him. Within minutes, Harry had purchased the owl, and after leaving the shop, he decided it was time to go home, and disapparated right in front of the shop. Meanwhile, at the Ministry of Magic, a letter addressed to the head of magical law enforcement had just been delivered to Madame Amelia Bones by a small tawny owl, who was quite surprised to receive such a letter as it had the seal of a pure-blood family. She could tell by the family crest outlined in the seal. Opening the letter, a small package that had been magically shrunk to fit in the envelope fell out and reverted back to its original size. Deciding to check what it is in the package after reading the letter, she proceeded to unfold the folded parchment, and this is what it said. To whom this may concern. It has recently come to my attention that an innocent man has been rotting away in Azkaban for 9 years for a crime that he did not commit. Who is this man, you ask? This innocent man that I write about goes by the name Sirius Orion Black, ex-Auror for the Ministry of Magic. I say this because it has come to my attention that this said man, who supposedly killed 12 Muggles and his friend Peter Pettigrew in broad daylight, and also is the secret keeper of James and Lily Potter, betrayed their whereabouts to Lord Voldemort, is in fact innocent. It also came to my attention that after he was caught, he wasn't given a trial and was merely assumed guilty and locked away in Azkaban. This isn't how justice is done. No one is found guilty until proven otherwise, but I have to ask, where is the proof that this man is guilty of the crimes charged against him? Attached to this letter is a vial containing a piece of my memory after reading my parents' will, which will prove this man's innocence and will serve as a missing piece to a puzzle which I am about to reveal to you. After viewing the memory, I implore you to think the things that I am about to ask over. When Sirius Black was said to have murdered 12 Muggles and Peter Pettigrew, how come the bodies of the 12 Muggles were discovered but not that of Peter Pettigrew except a thumb? And we all know that an Avada Kedavra curse only kills its victims but doesn't obliterate them. Couldn't this have been a ploy? I also want you to know that the memory I sent to you is totally pure and hasn't been tampered with, which I am sure you would be able to tell, and we all know that no amount of magic can create a memory except to tamper with it, so of course I did not create the said memory. However, to prove it further, the use of Veritaserum is advised. I am sure that you are wondering who sent you this letter. I am Lord Harry James Potter, son of the late James and Lily Potter. I implore you to please check into this matter, as we can't let an innocent man keep suffering for crimes that he did not commit. Also, before I bid you adieu for now, I beseech you to keep my identity a secret, until I say otherwise. By the way, if you need to send me a letter, just put my name on the envelope, the owl would be able to locate me. Sincerely, Lord Harry James Potter of the noble and most ancient House of Potter. To say that Madame Bones was shocked was an understatement. She couldn't believe what she had just read. If the content of these letters were true, then an innocent man had been sent to prison for a crime he did not commit. But how can it be true? A lot of people witnessed Sirius Black kill those people and Peter Pettigrew. Maybe this was the work of Death Eaters trying to free a fellow Death Eater, but what if it wasn't? She grabbed the letter again and thoroughly read through it, just to make sure, but the letter seemed too genuine to have been made up, and it had been signed Lord Harry James Potter. The boy was merely a child, surely he can't be a lord yet, she thought to herself as she hastily grabbed the record book that contained the names of the lords of the pureblood families. Scanning through it, she found his name there written in bold letters, Lord Harry James Potter of the noble and most ancient House of Potter. Oh, this isn't good, she thought, panicked. If the contents of this letter is true and action to release Sirius isn't put into operation, the boy could very well take this issue with the Wizengamot, and this could not only implement the ministry but also her department, especially her, being the head of the department, for the Potters are one of the most powerful and influential family in the wizard world and they hold the most seats in the Wizengamot. Not wanting to risk losing her job, she decided that it couldn't hurt to open up the case once again, and besides the boy had made some good points that warranted mulling over in the letter. So with her mind firmly made up, she grabbed the package that had accompanied the letter, and on opening it, just as the letter had said, there was a vial containing the wisp-like memory. Her heart racing in anticipation and apprehension at what she might discover, she grabbed a pensieve and placed it on her desk. Tipping the vial contents into it, she watched as Harry listened to the projection of his parents from the will. This will was written when we found out that Peter Pettigrew, one of the Marauders and our secret keeper, had leaked our whereabouts to Voldemort, and we know he's going to be coming for us soon. She gasped as she came out of the memory, still shocked to the core at what she had just seen and heard. The boy had been telling truth about Sirius' innocence. Oh, the poor man, but we still need to prove his innocence about killing the Muggles and Peter Pettigrew, which might be a lot harder to prove, although like the boy had suggested, the use of Veritaserum would do trick, she thought aloud to herself. Getting into action, she contacted the necessary people needed to help put things into motion to get Sirius Black out of Azkaban, and by the end of the day, a trial had been set for the next week to prove his innocence. The day after Harry had sent the letter, he was in the sitting room reading up on the art of animagi when he heard a tiny knock on the window, and as he ran to open the window he found a little owl with an envelope attached to its tiny leg. He pulled the string used to tie the envelope to the owl's leg and freed the owl. Before shutting the window, as he turned the envelope in his hand, he noticed that it had an official crest of some sort on it. Having a vague idea of where the letter was sent from, he quickly ripped it open, and here is what it said. Dear Lord Harry Potter, it came as unexpected surprise to receive your letter, but after reading through it, several times I might add, I have to admit that you pointed out some really important and regrettable faults caused by the ministry which resulted in the imprisonment of Sirius Black. However, using the piece of memory that you had included with the letter, it gives me great pleasure to say that it is sure to help in the acquittal of Sirius Black, and having contacted the right people necessary to set things into motion for this to happen, a trial had been set for next Thursday at the Wizengamot. All you need to do is flow into the ministry, or if you like, you could flow directly to my office on the day of the trial, because I guessing you would want to be present at the trial, and considering the fact that you are likely not to be familiar with the ministry, I could help take you to watch the trial. Sincerely, Head of Magical Law Enforcement, Madam Amelia Bones. Upon reading the letter, Harry wasted no time in sending a reply back, informing Madam Bones that he would be delighted to flow directly to her office on the day of the trial, and also made sure to thank her in the process for all of her effort in trying to help free his godfather. Things sure are starting to look up, the boy excitedly thought aloud to himself. 2 days before the trial, Harry apparated in Diagon Alley to buy some robes, as he had decided that he couldn't just go into the trial dressed in Dudley's hand-me-downs. He was the lord of a noble family and he had to dress to look the part. However, before he headed to the shop called Madame Malkin's Robes for all occasions, he made sure to disguise himself as a muggle-born of his age, size and height. He did this so that when he gets himself fitted for the robes as a muggle-born, they would still fit him when he reverts back to his own form. An hour later, Harry had himself fitted a bag full of expensive but fine quality dress robes, before he then made his way to a shop that sold muggle clothes, as he needed to buy some normal clothes anyway, and being the first time Harry has ever had the chance to get clothes that fitted him, he had to admit that he did go a little overboard shopping for the clothes. The night prior to the trial, Harry kept tossing and turning on his bed because he just couldn't get himself to sleep, and he had to admit it was because he keeps thinking about the trial and the fact that he would get to finally meet his godfather tomorrow. However, there was still a little part of that was a little nervous and scared that Sirius won't be released, even though with the evidence he had provided, it should be enough to get his godfather acquitted. The next day, Harry was up, bright and early, made himself breakfast even though he barely ate any of the food. He was too excited and nervous to make himself eat anything. At 9 a.m. sharp, Harry flowed to Madame Bones's office, and on getting there, he was met by a stern but kind-looking woman. "You're Harry Potter, I take it?" she asked, a little bit surprised at the small boy that had just emerged from the fireplace. "Yes, ma'am, I am Harry Potter, pleased to make your acquaintance," the child replied with a slight bow. Madame Bones had to admit that she was a bit taken aback by how polite he was, as she led him out of her office and led him down a hall, and when they got to the end of the hall they turned left and walked down another long hall. The walls were bare and there were no windows or doors except from a black one set at the very end of the hall, but much to Harry's surprise, they didn't go through the door, but instead they went past it and turned left again and found themselves in another hall. However, this hall looked a lot different from the other halls they had gone through. It had rough stone walls and torches in brackets, and it looked a lot like a scary hall in a medieval castle. The doors they passed here were heavy wooden ones with iron bolts and keyholes. "Courtroom 10, we are nearly there, Harry," Madame Bones said gently to the child, sensing his nervousness. She suddenly felt a surge of maternal protection and sympathy for the child, as she had an idea of how he was feeling at the moment. The child who had lost his parents at such a young age and then finding out that his godfather is being incarcerated for a crime he did not commit. That alone could make anyone fall into a pit of depression, but as she had seen from the determined and stubborn look in the boy's green eyes, she could see that for such a young child that had experienced so much pain in his young life, he is quite strong. Meanwhile, as soon as Madame Bones told him that they were almost at the trial room, Harry's heart had begun to beat a violent tattoo against his chest, and as they stopped in front of a grimy dark door with an immense iron lock, he silently prayed that the trial went well, not only for his sake but also for his poor, innocent godfather's. His breath hitched as Madame Bones turned the heavy iron door handle and waited for him to step into the courtroom before she went in. Harry gasped in surprise and awe at how grand the courtroom, he couldn't help himself. The walls of the room were made of dark stone, and dimly lit by torches. There were benches rising in levels along the walls of the square room, and held at least 200 people, including 50 at the far wall which had the highest rising benches. An empty chair stood in the very center of the room. There was something about that chair that gave him the chills. Chains encircled the arms of it, as though its occupants were usually tied to it. He had a feeling that his godfather is going to have to sit in the chair for his trial. Harry was still staring at the chair when Madame Bones gave him a gentle nudge to move, and they found a seat on a bench at the end of the room, the bench raised high above the others. He looked around him and saw that everyone seemed to be staring at the far end of the room, where there was a door. Just as he was about to turn to Madame Bones to ask when the trial was going to start, he heard footsteps. The door in the corner of the room opened and 3 people entered, or at least one man flanked by 2 tall cloaked creatures whose faces were completely hidden by their hoods, and were gliding slowly towards the chair in the center of the room, each grasping one of the man's arms with their dead and rotten-looking hands. Harry's insides went cold. Harry had read about these creatures. They were dark creatures called Dementors that fed off human happiness and thus caused depression and despair to anyone near them. The man between them looked as though he was about to faint, and as the Dementors placed the man in the chained chair, everyone in the room recoiled slightly and they all breathed a silent sigh of relief as the Dementors glided back out of the room. As the door swung shut behind them, Harry focused on the man now sitting in the chair. A mass of filthy, matted hair hung to his elbows, and if it hadn't been for the eyes shining out of the deep, dark socket, he might have been a corpse. The waxy skin was stretched so tightly over the bones of his face, it looked like a skull. He was dressed in thin and ragged robes and was slumped slightly in a resigned manner in the chair. As Harry watched, the chains on the arms of the chair glowed suddenly gold and snaked their way up, his godfather's arms, binding him there. His godfather didn't even move, and Harry was started to doubt if he had even felt it. He looked so resigned, as he had given up on life itself. Harry's felt a surge of anger at the people that had let this happen to his godfather. If they had done their investigation right, the poor man wouldn't even be sitting in that dreadful chair right now. He was pulled out of his thoughts when a voice rang out. "Sirius Orion Black," said the curt voice to Harry's left. As the voice rang out, Madame Bones, who Harry had forgotten about, reached out and squeezed his hand lightly in comfort, and all he could manage was a little smile at her before he turned his attention back to his godfather. "You were sent to Azkaban 9 years ago for the killing of 12 muggles and a wizard, Peter Pettigrew, in broad daylight in the middle of a street full of muggles, and also for betraying the Potters to Lord Voldemort as their secret keeper. However, it has come to our attention that you weren't given a trial before being convicted. How do you plead it?" Sirius, who had sat up straight in his chair as best as he could with him being tightly bound to it, glanced around the room, his expression defiant. "I plead not guilty to all the charges counted against me," he said hoarsely. His voice sounded as though he had long since lost the habit of using it. There was a collective murmur around the benches. "To make sure the accused is speaking the truth, we are now going to question him under the influence of Veritaserum," the voice to Harry's left said. A man emerged from the door at the far end of the room holding a small glass bottle of completely clear liquid. He walked over to Sirius, who without being told to had already opened his mouth, bent over him and poured 3 drops of the liquid into his mouth. The effects of the truth serum seemed to have worked because Sirius's face was slack and his gaze seemed to be slightly unfocused. The voice rang out again over the loud murmurs in the courtroom. "Sirius Orion Black, were you Lily and James Potter's secret keeper?" "No, I wasn't Lily and James Potter's secret keeper. Peter Pettigrew was. Initially I was supposed to be their secret keeper, but I told them to change it to Peter Pettigrew because I was an obvious choice and Voldemort would have figured it out. I thought it was the perfect plan, a bluff. Voldemort would be sure to come after me, would never dream they'd use Peter," he replied in a flat, expressionless voice. By now some of the witches and wizards around Harry were muttering again, some nodded while some others were frowning and shaking their heads. "Did you kill those muggles and Peter Pettigrew?" the voice asked again. "No, I didn't, Peter Pettigrew did," Sirius replied in the same flat and expressionless voice. "Can you explain to the courtroom the incident of that day and how the muggles were killed?" the voice asked. Sirius took a deep shuddering breath and began to speak in the same flat tone. "The night Lily and James died, I'd arranged to check on Peter, to make sure he was still safe, but when I arrived at his hiding place, he'd gone. Yet there was no sign of a struggle. It didn't feel right. I was scared. I set out for the Potter's house straight away. And when I saw their house, destroyed, and their bodies, I realized what Peter must have done. After my discovery, I went after Peter. I found him in a city street where I yelled at him for betraying our friends, and all he did was laugh, after which he cut off his thumb and created an explosion that killed off those muggles. and before he escaped he yelled out that I killed the Potters, after which he turned into a rat and escaped into a sewage, for you see, Peter is an animagus and his animagus form is a rat. As soon as Sirius finished talking, the whole courtroom erupted in a wave of loud whispering and murmuring, as if they couldn't believe what they were hearing or didn't want to believe it. Silence. The voice rang out this time, sounding slightly impatient and enraged. As we can see, and from what we have heard today, Sirius Black wasn't as innocent of all the crimes that were charged against him. Those in favor of clearing the accused of all charges. There were hands in the air, many of them, more than half. Breathing very fast, Harry tried to count, but before he could finish, the voice boomed out again saying, and those in favor of returning the accused back to Azkaban. Only about 2 or 3 people put their hands up. Harry breathed a sigh of relief as the voice said, very well, Sirius Orion Black is cleared of all charges. And on behalf of the Ministry of Magic, we would like to say that we are sorry for the misunderstanding and would be glad to compensate you enormously for all the difficulty and misery that you had gone through these past few years. With that, the chains that had wrapped around Sirius fell away. Harry could feel the tears pricking at the back of his eyes as he watched his godfather stagger slightly to his feet, a smile pasted on his lips, lighting up his eyes. Before he could make his way towards his godfather, Harry felt himself being engulfed in a hug by Madame Bones and he fiercely hugged her back. Before he pulled away, he whispered, "Thank you." She felt her throat constrict slightly as she hugged the child tightly to her bosom. "No, this was all you're doing, Harry, you should be proud of yourself." After the child pulled away, his face masked by a blank stare, which she suspected was to hide his nervousness, she said, "Come on, let's go meet your godfather." As Harry followed behind Madame Bones to meet his godfather, he could feel his heart beating hard against his chest. He was nervous, and excited. He was finally going to meet his godfather, the only real family he had left. As they reached Sirius, who had been receiving handshakes and congratulatory pats on the back, Madame Bones tapped him lightly on the back. As he turned around to face her, she said, "Congratulations, Mr. Black, on your freedom." As he replied, he smiled at her, although his eyes still had a look of wariness in them. "Thanks, and I heard that you had something to do with it. Actually, I shouldn't receive credit for getting you out, it was all Harry's doing." As soon as he heard the child's name, his eyes widened in surprise. "Harry?" He repeated in askance. "Yes, Harry Potter, your godson, would you like to meet him?" "He's here, right now, with you," Sirius asked, not letting the woman reply before asking the next question. He was finally going to meet his godson, his last link to his best friends. Before the woman could reply, a small child emerged from behind her. He was dressed in expensive dark green robes, with a mop of unruly dark hair. His sharp, intelligent eyes were the lightest shade of green he had ever seen. Ignoring the people around him, he took a step towards the child but stopped short, not wanting to scare him, but before he could say a word, the child, who had been regarding him with a cool, guarded look until now, took a step forward and wrapped his skinny arms around his waist in a tight hug. He breathed a sigh of relief as he hugged his godson back, equally tight but careful enough not to suffocate him. Harry was happy. He finally had a family. Sirius had been back with him at Godric Hollow for almost a week now and things couldn't be more perfect. Although Sirius still looked emaciated, he was starting to put on a bit of weight and gaining some color back into his cheeks. As soon as they had gotten home after the trial, Sirius had asked him to fill him about his life in the Dursleys. As soon as he was done, his godfather had gotten up, enraged and threatening to deal with them, while cursing Dumbledore. However, as touched as he was by this gesture, he couldn't care less about the Dursleys or Dumbledore. He had gotten his godfather back and now he had a family and that's all he cared about. Since Sirius' return, he had started making plans for them to move to one of the castles belonging to Harry as he felt it was a lot safer there than Godric Hollow. Right now, Harry was home alone. Sirius had gone to Diagon Alley to sort out a few family matters at Gringotts since he was the only surviving member of his family left. An hour later, Sirius apparated at the door before letting himself in, as they had agreed to leave the protective spells Harry had put up around the house, just the way it is. "Hey, Harry, I got you something for you," his godfather said excitedly as he entered the house, dropping his coat on a chair in the sitting room. Harry, who had never been bought a gift ever, except the ones he bought for himself, was really excited. He didn't care if it was little or big. "What is it?" he asked excited, as his godfather pulled out a long, thin package. "Why don't you open it and see for yourself?" his godfather replied, laughing at the child's enthusiasm and watching excitedly and slightly nervous as the child ripped open the parcel with unbridled glee. As he opened the parcel, a broomstick rolled out onto the floor. "Wow," he sighed as he stared at it. "It's called a Nimbus 2000, it's the latest model out," Sirius said tentatively, as he couldn't tell if the child, who was still staring dumbstruck at the broomstick, was pleased or not. Dragging his eyes from the broom, he cleared his throat slightly to get rid of the lump wedged there before he looked up at his godfather. "Thanks, I love it." Sirius let out a breath he didn't realize he had been holding. "Do you really? Because I could always take it back and get you something else," he hastily said. No, I love it, really," Harry replied as he stared at the broomstick. He didn't know much about brooms, but he thought it looked wonderful. Sleek and shiny, with a mahogany handle, it had a long tail of neat, straight twigs and Nimbus 2000 written in gold near the top. "But I've never ridden one," he muttered shyly to his godfather, who just smiled at him and brought out another broom, the same model as Harry's. "That's no problem, I could teach you," he said, before going into the kitchen to make dinner. A few weeks later, Sirius and Harry moved into Potter Manor. They chose Potter Manor because Sirius thought it would make Harry feel closer to his parents and because his parents would have wanted him to stay there. Moving away from Godric Hollow was a bittersweet moment for Harry, because it was where his parents had spent the last few months of their lives and where he had regained his freedom and found happiness. But he knew moving signifies starting a new chapter in his life with his godfather, and he knew they just couldn't keep living there. Not only were they not supposed to be staying, since it was supposed to be a monument to his family and to Voldemort's downfall. Also, since Dumbledore had heard about Sirius' freedom from Azkaban, he has been trying to contact him, sending him letters and asking for his whereabouts so that they could meet up and talk. Although Sirius and Harry suspected that the only reason he wanted to know of his whereabouts was so that he could get to Harry, since the press had mentioned briefly about Harry's involvement in getting Sirius's freedom, and Dumbledore would have figured out that Harry was with him. When he didn't receive any reply to any of the letters sent to Sirius after a week, they found him loitering around the cottage trying to get in, but Harry's protection spells had prevented him from getting in, and they had gotten a good laugh watching him being thrown back on his bottom repeatedly as he tried to get in. They had even solidified the protection with some blood protection spells, which meant only Sirius and Harry could get into the cottage. They apparated somewhere in Scotland, in front of a forest. They walked for quite a while until they got to the edge of the forest, and right at the edge, Harry saw a huge grand gate. "Do you see it?" Sirius asked, much to Harry's confusion. "What?" he asked, thinking his godfather had lost his marbles. Smiling, his godfather said, "The Potter's Manor had been enchanted to be only visible to the owner and anyone else they allow in, and technically I could usually see it before, but since your parents are gone and the castle is now in your name, only you can see it, and until you let me in, I won't be able to." "Oh, how about the Muggles?" Harry asked. "The Muggles can't see it either. Your family enchanted the forest in such a way that when a Muggle tries to go into the forest, they forget about it, turn around and go back to where they were coming from," Sirius replied. With that, Harry walked up to the rather imposing gate, and as soon as he got there, he immediately knew what to do without being told. So he bent down and retrieved a little twig and transfigured it into a needle. After pricking his finger with it to draw blood, he ran his finger down the side of the gate, which glowed a deep shape of gold before flinging itself open. As soon as the gate swung open, Harry took a step through it and beckoned Sirius to follow him, and with him giving Sirius permission to enter, Sirius could now see the gate. Smiling slightly, his godfather went in through the gate, and found his godson gaping in amazement and wonder at the building that towered before them and its surroundings. Sirius understood why the child was so astounded. He had had a similar reaction the first time he had come to the Potter's castle. They were still looking around their surroundings, Harry in amazement and Sirius in nostalgia, reminiscing about his time here as a child with his best friend, and later when he used to visit with James and Lily, when an elf appeared with a pop in front of them, making Harry jump a little. "Welcome back, Master Harry and Master Sirius," the elf said with a bow. "Who are you exactly?" Harry asked, still a little surprised at seeing an elf, as he had never actually seen one and had only read about them. "I is Dinky, the head elf in the Potter Castle," the elf replied. Sirius, who hadn't said a word since the elf appeared, smiled at the elf. "How are you, Dinky?" "Dinky is very well, Master Sirius. I is happy Master Harry is back to the castle." Harry blinked in surprise at his godfather. "Without the master of the castle, they've had no one to care for since it's their job, and so they have been waiting for you to return and take over, for you see house elves are immensely devoted and loyal to the one designated as their master, which in this case is you," his godfather told him. Understanding better, Harry turned to the elf. Smiling, he said, "It's good to be back home. Would you mind giving me a tour of the castle?" "I is glad to, Master Harry." With that, the elf gave them a tour of the rather large castle, and Harry also met all the other house elves, and on their way back to the main room, he suddenly noticed a movement at the corner of his eye. Looking to the wall where he had seen the movement, he saw portraits lined on the wall, and they were all moving, some even moving from one portrait to another. "Harry, these are the portraits of your family," Sirius said, before introducing the child to almost of all of them, and much to Harry's surprise, the portraits talked. By the time they got to the end of the hall, Harry had not only met his grandparents, but also his great-great-grandparents, and he had to admit that it felt good to meet and talk to them, even if they were just portraits. He spent almost half an hour, listening to his grandparents regale him with tales of James and Sirius's mischievous antics as children. However, when his stomach started rumbling noises, his grandparents told him to go and eat, but before he left, they made him promise to come back to visit. Dinky led him to his bedroom, which was 3 times the size of the Dursleys' living room, which was fairly large, and much to Harry's delight, it had an ensuite bathroom and a ridiculously large walk-in closet, which was already stocked with his clothes. The elves had unpacked their luggage. His godfather told him to freshen up and come back downstairs as soon as he was done, telling him that he had a surprise waiting for him as he headed out of the bedroom, towards his own, which was just a few rooms down from his. Excitedly, Harry hurriedly freshened up before heading down to the main room, and in the course of his hurry, he got lost twice before calling for Dinky, who then led him down. As soon as they got down, he asked his godfather what the surprise was, but much to his disappointment, he was told that he had to wait until after they had had their dinner. Soon they were led to the dining room, where they were presented with what Harry could only call a banquet, because instead of a simple dinner as he had expected, the table had been laden with so many dishes, that he actually thought there was going to be a party, for there were all the things he liked, including roast beef, roast chicken, pork chops and lamb chops, sausages, bacon and steak, boiled potatoes, roast potatoes, fries, Yorkshire pudding, peas, carrots, gravy, ketchup. And he had dug in with gusto. Excitedly he waited patiently for Sirius, who was taking a long time to finish his dinner, but as he finished, Harry asked, "So what's the surprise?" Leading him to the main room, Sirius stopped in front of 2 portraits, and as Harry cautiously walked up to it, he gasped in surprise. Those were his parents' portraits, and they were smiling at him. "Hi, Harry," his dad said, and when Harry, who seemed to have forgotten how to speak, didn't reply, he went on, "Wow, you have grown so big. To think just a few years back, your mum and I used to change your diaper." "Merlin, James, you're making the poor child blush," his mother interrupted. "What, he has grown and we did change his diaper. Sirius, aren't I right?" his father asked his best friend. Putting up his hands and laughing, Sirius replied, "Oh no. Leave me out of this, James." Harry, who had now regained his ability to speak, whispered shyly, "Hi Mum, hi Dad." "Oh, James, he looks so much like you," his mum said to his father before turning back to him. "Harry, Sirius told us how you were being treated by the Dursleys. I'm so sorry you had to experience that." "Yes son, you were supposed to have been placed in Sirius's care, but I guess with him stuck in Azkaban," his father trailed off. "I still can't believe that Dumbledore put you in their care." "It's all right Mum and Dad, all that matters now is that I'm with him and I'm happy," Harry said, smiling before looking up at his godfather, who grabbed him in a fierce hug. Harry and Sirius talked with his parents for almost an hour, until Sirius announced that it was Harry's bedtime, who whined and said he wasn't tired. To placate him, his parents told him that their portrait is always in the living room and he could come and talk to them anytime. Satisfied by that, he grudgingly went up to his bedroom, and as soon as his head hit the pillow, he was fast asleep. Within a month of their stay at the manor, Harry and Sirius had fit right into life there. Although he missed Godric Hollow, Harry had to admit that the manor was perfect in every way. Not only is the library huge, but it also had a vast and extensive collection of books on just about everything, which Harry had set about selecting to study the first day he had set foot into the library. Also, after talking to his parents' portrait, and had told them about his interests in potion making, his mother had directed him to the potions room, which looked more like a huge laboratory filled with items and supplies needed for potion making. As it turned out, his mother and some of his ancestors had had a huge in potion making too. He had squealed like a girl the minute he entered the room and had spent almost every day since then making potions. He began to shirk some of his other studies because of it, even to the point that his godfather had to pry him out with a spell each time because he kept forgetting to come out for lunch and dinner. The time Harry was beginning to spend in either the library or potions room was beginning to grate on Sirius's nerves, because he felt that although his godson should be studying as he is, but he needed to also focus on other subjects that he seemed to have abandoned due to all the excitement of moving. So he decided to create a timetable for Harry, so that he could spend time equally on all his subjects and also have time to just be a kid, because he felt that Harry had had to grow up too soon for a child his age. Within the month, Harry now had a schedule of when to study for a certain subject, and although he didn't like the rules at first because it reduced the time he could spend in the potions room, however he did appreciate it because it gave him more time to study other subjects that he felt he didn't have enough time for, especially his defense against the dark arts lesson, which Sirius had decided he would be tutoring him on. As it turned out, the manor had a huge room for training, which Sirius had begun to use to tutor Harry in dueling and also to practice the Dada lessons, which much to his surprise, the child was a natural. However, as Harry had discovered in his first dueling practice, he needed to be in good shape, so he had started to join his godfather on his early morning jogs and exercises, and had also began to visit the manor's gym. However, with all the studying and training he had, Harry had to admit that he was loving every single minute he had spent at the manor. Not only was his godfather an awesome teacher, but he couldn't have asked for a better guardian. He now had someone to do all those things he had wished he had a parent to do with, like for example, just a few weeks ago, his godfather had taken him on a surprise trip to an amusement park and they had spent all day going on all the rides and taking pictures, which for Harry was a wonderful experience since he had never been allowed to go to amusement parks or anywhere fun for that matter when he was at the Dursleys. They would always take him to stay at Mrs. Figg's place, a rather peculiar woman who lived across the street with cats, and always made sure to show Harry the pictures of every single one of them, and boy, does she have a lot of cats. Harry and Sirius were in the main living room playing on the new Xbox that Sirius just got them, when they heard a tiny knock on the window. As soon as Harry opened the window, a barn owl flew in with a letter addressed to Sirius, who ripped it open and read it before handing it over to Harry to read. Dear Sirius, look, I know I'm probably the last person you want to talk to, but I honestly thought it was you who had betrayed Lily and James to Voldemort. I mean, who else who they have chosen to be their secret keeper if not you? You were closer to them than Peter and I were, so until I heard the news of the trial and your acquittal, I never knew it was Peter. Dumbledore just recently informed me that you have regained guardianship over Harry. What is he like? Does he look like James or Lily? I really would like to meet him one of these days, but I also would like to meet with you too, Sirius. I'm sorry I believed that you would ever betray James and Lily, but I didn't know what to believe at the point of their death and was too stricken with grief to think otherwise, especially after Dumbledore told me that he had been there when they chose you to be their secret keeper. I would totally understand if you do not want to talk to me, but if you do change your mind, I would be at the Leaky Cauldron around 2 this Friday. I really hope to see you there. R. J. Lupin. After reading the letter, Harry turned to his godfather, who hadn't moved from where he had been standing since he handed the letter to him to read. Wasn't Lupin one of the marauders? Harry asked, remembering some stories of the marauders' antics Sirius and his dad's portrait told him. With a wary scowl his godfather replied, his voice almost a growl, yeah, he was. Harry could tell by the determined set of his jaw that his godfather wasn't planning on considering going to meet up with his old friend, and although he could understand why Sirius wasn't so forgiving of his friend, he knew it wasn't Lupin's fault for believing that Sirius was responsible for his parents' death. The evidence had been stacked against him, and besides, according to Sirius, they had all trusted Dumbledore and believed whatever he says, so it wasn't surprising that Lupin had believed him when Dumbledore had informed him that Sirius was the one who had betrayed the Potters to Voldemort. "So are you going to go meet him?" Harry asked his godfather, although he had a pretty good idea of what his reply would be. "No," was the abrupt reply he got. As he opened his mouth to reply, Sirius cut him off. "Look, Harry, I know you probably want to meet him, but you don't understand. He was supposed to be my closest friend. He should have known that I would never have done anything to hurt James or Lily." By now his godfather was pacing the floor, running his hands through his hair distractedly. He looked wounded. The playful expression that had been on his face before the letter came was gone. Harry had never seen his godfather like this. He knew Sirius must be feeling really betrayed, but he also knew that he missed his old friend despite all that has happened. He remembered how his face lights up every time he regaled Harry with stories of the Marauders, pranks and mischief at Hogwarts. He knew he just had to convince Sirius to go and meet up with his friend. "Look, I know you think that I don't understand, and I probably don't, but I do know that with all that has happened, it is high time we all moved on and forgive each other. I'm sure it is what my parents would have wanted, and besides, I know you miss him." He broke off mid-sentence when he realized that his godfather had stopped pacing and was now listening to him. He went on. "Why don't you just give him a chance to explain himself, because I'm sure he wouldn't have abandoned you if he hadn't been convinced that you did betray my parents." With a defeated sigh, his godfather smiled fondly at him. "Oh Harry, you are just like your father. He always knew what to say to get me to do the right thing. All right, I would go to the Leaky Cauldron." He paused as if he just got an idea. His eyes twinkling with excitement, he asked, "Do you want to come with me? We could do some quick shopping for training supplies." Knowing his godfather, Harry knew that training supplies wouldn't be all they would shop for. The last time they had gone to Diagon Alley, his godfather had left him engrossed in a book on transfiguration in Flourish and Blots, and snuck off to buy some sweets and chocolates as a surprise for Harry, because he had been shocked to find out that Harry had never had sweets from the wizarding world, so he had made it his mission to introduce Harry to them. With a smile, he replied, "I would love to go." Beaming brightly, his godfather replied, "Since that's settled, how about we go outside and fly a bit?" Meanwhile, back at Hogwarts, Dumbledore was pacing impatiently in his office. He stopped abruptly as a man came out of the fireplace and walked into the office. "Lupin, how did it go?" he asked as soon as the man entered. "Well, I have sent him a letter and now all we can do is wait," the man replied, frowning a little at the old man. "What do you mean? Didn't they reply you?" Dumbledore asked, trying to remain calm although he was feeling quite the opposite. He needs for the plan to work. It is his last chance. "No, they weren't supposed to reply. All I said was that I would be there and that they had the choice to meet me there," Lupin replied, still frowning at the way Dumbledore was acting. Since he had entered the office, Dumbledore hadn't stopped pacing. The old man stopped pacing to face him, his voice a deadly whisper but calm and his face betraying no emotion of what he is feeling. "Why, you shouldn't have given them that option. All you were supposed to do is convince them that you made a mistake and you want to reacquaint yourself with them. That's exactly what I did, because I did make a mistake and I am trying to make it up to them, but I am not going to force them to accept my apology." "Hang on, why exactly are you pushing this?" Lupin asked the old man, suspicion lacing his voice. He didn't understand why Dumbledore seemed to be pushing this as much. At first he had thought the old man was just being understanding and trying to help him patch things up with Sirius, but with the way he has been acting since he had arrived to inform him about the letter, Remus was starting to think that there was another game being played here and he wasn't quite sure what it was. "Because I think that it was partially my fault that you and Sirius are estranged and I feel guilty about it," the old man replied, trying to make his voice sound as sincere as possible. He knew Lupin was getting suspicious and he couldn't let that happen, otherwise his plan would be ruined. Lupin couldn't know about his plan, he had to make sure of it even though he needed him as an essential piece. "Look, there is nothing to feel guilty about, we all thought Sirius did it. He was the closest to them. Besides, if he doesn't come on Friday, it doesn't mean that I wouldn't try again." "Well, let's hope that they do, although I want you to do just one thing for me if they do come," Dumbledore said, his glint in his bright eyes more pronounced. His suspicion assuaged, Lupin asked, "What is it?" "Well, Sirius seems to think that I abandoned him to rot in Azkaban too, and he hasn't been replying to my letters too, and he has turned young Harry against me. What I want you do, is to send me an owl or a Patronus when they meet with you at the Leaky Cauldron, but do so discreetly so that they don't know, because if they do find out, I'm pretty sure they would leave before I could get there to talk to them and apologize too. Do you understand? Yeah, sure, but I don't think Sirius would ever turn Harry against you. Are you sure of what you're saying? Lupin just had to ask because although he knows his friend's bad temper could get out of hand sometimes, like when he had tricked their rival, Snape, back at Hogwarts to go to the Whomping Willow during one of his transformations at full moon, which could have hurt or even killed him if it hadn't been for James rescuing him. However, he knew that Sirius wouldn't do something like keeping Harry away from Dumbledore out of spite. Of course, I am sure, Remus, people change in Azkaban. They never fully recover their sanity after they leave. And since Sirius already blames me for leaving him there, the only way to punish me is by getting Harry to hate me, knowing how much I would love to meet the child and get to know him, Dumbledore replied calmly. At exactly 1 o'clock, Harry and Sirius apparated into Diagon Alley, but very well disguised, with Harry disguised as a Muggle using his Metamorphagus ability, and Sirius also as a Muggle but under the influence of Polyjuice. They had decided to use disguises because they really wanted to avoid any attention, and also so that whatever spies Dumbledore had placed in Diagon Alley wouldn't recognize them. Since they had an hour before they had to meet up with Remus, Sirius decided to treat Harry to some ice cream, and so they headed for Florine Fortescue's ice cream parlor, where they both bought chocolate and raspberry flavored ice cream filled with chopped nuts. After they left the ice cream shop, on Harry's request they headed for the apothecary shop, where Harry proceeded to stock up on some ingredients that he had used up at home for making potions. As soon as he had paid for his purchases, Sirius excitedly ushered him out of the shop and over to the only Muggle shop in Diagon Alley. Thinking that they had come in to buy clothes for him, as he opened his mouth to protest that he didn't need any more clothes, his godfather held up a finger indicating that he shouldn't. Not